Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Bakari Lumumba back once again, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com. Have a great show prepared for you all this Sunday afternoon, September 1st, 2024, where we're going to be discussing Trinidad and Tobago Redraws coat of arms to remove Columbus's ships. Is this a move toward Pan-Africanism? If you're watching, you know that this is a dual stream once again with, of course, LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black, and Beacon Network, the Pan-African social media extraordinaire, the home of course, African-centered news and information. And we're looking forward to having a great show on this afternoon. So without further ado, family, I'm going to bring in a man who truly needs no introduction. I argue that he is, of course, the resident historian here at, of course, Beacon Network and LumumbaSpeaks.com. We're talking about the man, the myth, the legend, your favorite historian's favorite historian, and, of course, a scholar, a Pan-Africanist, and soon to be a lawyer, or as they like to say in the Caribbean, a barrister. Without further ado, family, Brother Dwayne Omawale. How you doing, brother?
Appreciate it. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing quite all right. So we're going to jump right into it. As you are aware, Trinidad and Tobago has decided to redraw their coat of arms to remove Christopher Columbus's ships. Some would argue that this may be a move toward Pan-Africanism. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say it is a move towards Pan-Africanism only in the sense that this is what Pan-Africanists in Trinidad and the Caribbean region as a whole have been advocating for decades, that we need to start removing the remnants of colonialism and uplifting and upholding more African-centered aspects of the Caribbean culture and actual aspects of the Caribbean culture, Caribbean history, rather than the elements of Caribbean culture and Caribbean history that glorifies and highlights the colonial legacy. So, this is something that, as I said, Pan-Africanists have been advocating for many decades in Trinidad. So it is encouraging to me to see these efforts taking place, not only in Trinidad. This is a wider regional thing that we think throughout the Caribbean, but particularly in Trinidad is very, very important as well, because I don't know how many viewers would be aware of this, but yesterday was actually the anniversary of Trinidad's independence. So
August 31st, okay.
Yeah,
1962?
Yeah, 1962. Yeah. So to me, that's especially important because what we see happening in a lot of post-colonial societies in the Caribbean and throughout Africa is that there was a political independence, but we're still fighting to attain a cultural independence and a cultural decolonization. So whenever I see things like this happening, it's a reminder that although cultural decolonization is an ongoing process, we are making progress towards that goal.
Absolutely. So we're familiar with, of course, the history of Trinidad and Tobago, the twin island nation in the Caribbean, just off the north coast of South Africa, particularly Venezuela, if I'm citing my geography correctly. But Trinidad and Tobago has a long history of Pan-Africanism. I've always made the argument that Trinidad and Tobago has produced the most Pan-Africanists per capita than any country or nation in the world. So we talk about one Henry Sylvester Williams, who, of course, coined the term with the help of a Sister Kenlock from South Africa. We talk about one George Padmore, Cyril James, and of course Kwame Ture. But could you share with those of us who are not in the know about some less known Pan-Africanists that hail from the Twin Island nation?
Yeah, I think you might be correct in that. I haven't actually sat down and crunched the numbers, but Trinidad could make a good case for producing more Pan-Africanists per capita than any other country. And I mean, you cited ones that are more well-known on the international front. But even just on a national and regional level, Trinidad has produced some very prominent Pan-African figures as well. So particularly as pertaining to this conversation, two that would come to mind are Kafra Kambon and Makandal Daga. Makandal Daga actually passed a few years ago, and Kafra Kambon is still a very respected elder Pan-African advocate in the region. And why those two are particularly significant for the purposes of this discussion is in 1970, they led what's known as the Black Power uprising in Trinidad. Okay. And a part of what that uprising was about was the same topic I mentioned, that even though by 1970 Trinidad was politically independent, there was a feeling that there's still issues pertaining to the colonial legacy in Trinidad, that there still needed to be a cultural decolonization and a structural decolonization. So a big part of what the Black Power movement was about was fighting against the fact that even though Trinidad and Tobago had become independent, it still was a colonial society. There were still colonial structures in place. For example, if you were an African or even an Indian in Trinidad, you couldn't obtain certain jobs. Particularly in the banking sector, those jobs were still jobs that were given predominantly to the white population on the Twin Islands. So it became an issue where people felt that even though Trinidad and Tobago on paper was independent, there still was the same colonial structure in place, and that colonial structure was keeping African people, keeping Indian people, keeping people who were oppressed under the old colonial structure oppressed, even though Trinidad and Tobago, as I said on paper, was independent. So the Black Power uprising in 1970 was an effort to create some type of structural changes in the country to make the country more accessible to the African population. But a big part of what that was as well was the cultural decolonization. That's why Makando, Daga, and Kafur Kambo took the African names that they have, those one names. So part of that movement was a gradual shift towards taking on African names, embracing African culture. And it's particularly represented in the music. Last night we were having a conversation with music out of Trinidad. So in the 1970s is where we start seeing very prominent Pan-African voices in the music emerging. People like the Mighty Chocolate, people like Black Stalin, Brother Valentino, Shadow. These are people who, if you're a fan of the calypso art form out of Trinidad, out of the Caribbean, these are very prominent figures that emerged in that movement. And all of these artists use their music to not only advocate for the same type of structural decolonization that I mentioned, but also cultural decolonization as well. And particularly when we see what's happening in Trinidad now, where there's discussions about going even further and taking down the Columbus statue.
Yes.
Columbus in Trinidad. Shadow, one of the artists that I just mentioned, he had a song called Columbus Light. And the point of the song was that, we celebrate Columbus as the man who discovered the Americas, and Shadow was saying not Columbus was a liar, but when he landed in America, there were people already living in the Americas, so how could he discover land that was already occupied? So those were the type of things that the Pan-African artists at the time were putting forward in their music. So as I said, in the 1970s, the Pan-Africans that emerged out of Trinidad and Tobago were people who advocated for the very decolonization that we're seeing now. So, but to answer that question, those would just be some of the names who might not be as well known to American audiences who aren't necessarily familiar with the history and the politics of Trinidad and Tobago, but Pan-Africanism has had and continues to have a significant legacy on the trajectory of the nation.
Very good, very good. And you're from the Caribbean, correct?
Yeah.
Guyana, yes.
Yeah.
Could you discuss the connection that Afro-Caribbean people have, not only with African Americans, but African people in the African continent, African culture?
Yeah, I mean, it's a deep connection, and we could just go off of some of the names that you listed as prominent Pan-Africanist out of Trinidad. We think about Henry Sylvester Williams, who called the Pan-African conference, which was, I would argue, essentially the start of the formal Pan-African movement. What we refer to as Pan-Africanism. I would argue that Pan-Africanism obviously existed before the 1900 conference as an idea and as a concept, but he formalized what we know today as Pan-Africanism. So it really starts with that conference that's put together by Henry Sylvester Williams, and it wasn't just a conference for Pan-Africanists out of the Caribbean. African Americans attended that conference as well. George Padmore actually served as an advisor for Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. C.L.R. James as well had a lot of connections with Pan-Africanists throughout the world. So there's a very deep connection in the sense that Pan-Africanists from the Caribbean have made very important contributions, not only regionally, but globally as well. You mentioned you being from Guyana. Guyana has played a big role in the Pan-African movement as well. There's Walter Rodney. For a period of time, Walter Rodney was actually a professor in Tanzania where he taught classes. Forbes Burnham, the former president, prime minister of Guyana, he gave a lot of funds and resources and support to various revolutionary anti-colonial movements and struggles on the continent. So you see, Guyana actually played a role in financing those revolutionary struggles across the continent. So I could go on and list more examples, but the point is that Pan-Africanists in the Caribbean have actually played a very prominent important role in the anti-colonial struggle in Africa. And the connection between Africans in the Caribbean and the United States is particularly interesting because starting from how we even arrived in the Americas from Africa, I'm sure you're familiar with this history, but there were certain situations where slave ships would actually stop in the Caribbean islands, drop off Africans there, and then continue to the United States. So for some Africans who arrived in the United States, the Caribbean was actually the first stop before they went to the United States. So we see that connection, and a more direct connection as well in terms of African American Caribbean people who've actually played direct roles in African American liberation struggle. For example, Denmark BC showed people who are familiar with the history of struggle against slavery in the United States would be familiar with that name. He wasn't born in America; he was born in the Caribbean. You mentioned Kwame Ture. Kwame Ture played a very prominent role in the Black Power movement in the United States, being from Trinidad. Malcolm X, his mother being from Grenada. Marcus Garvey and what he was
from Jamaica, yes.
So even in the history of the United States, we find examples of people who were either from the Caribbean or had a Caribbean background that played a very prominent role in the movement. And the same thing is true in the Caribbean, that a lot of the social political movements in the Caribbean were influenced by things happening in the United States. So, for example, Marcus Garvey, his inspiration for even forming the Universal Negro Improvement Association in Jamaica came from reading Booker T. Washington, who was an African American.
Right.
Booker T. Washington also influenced certain Haitian Pan-Africanists like John Price Mars. He was a Haitian Pan-Africanist who was influenced by Booker T. Washington's ideas as well. So we see Booker T. Washington, in particular, having a very strong influence on a certain generation of Pan-African thinkers coming out of the Caribbean. The Black Power movement is very interesting, actually, because Kwame Ture, being from Trinidad, helped to spark the Black Power movement in the United States, and then the same Black Power movement in the United States also helped to initiate the Black Power movement in the Caribbean. So a lot of the social and political movements that were happening in the Caribbean in the 1960s and 1970s were actually influenced and shaped by certain political developments in the United States. So go back to some of the Calypsonians that I mentioned. For example, Black Stalin. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, he actually did a song in tribute to MLK, because for African people in the Caribbean, the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement happening in the United States was something that was very important, and people in the Caribbean really identified with the liberation struggle of African Americans. So there's been a very lengthy history of the two struggles being directly connected, and a very lengthy history of the two struggles influencing each other in various ways.
Very good, very good. I think you provided a very robust, understanding and history, of course, of the connection of African people throughout the world, particularly in which we're centering, of course, the Caribbean in this conversation. So, once again, with you being from the Caribbean, is this move to this push or decision by the Trinidadian government to remove Christopher Columbus ships from, of course, their coat of arms? Is this symbolic, or can there be substantial political, economic, and social ramifications for such a move?
I think it would be nice to see those ramifications coming out of this, but if I'm being honest, I think what we're seeing happening right now is it's largely symbolic. Trinidad and Tobago is still very much a neo-colonial society, and that's why before I made the distinction between structural decolonization and cultural decolonization, that you can have the cultural decolonization, but still having certain colonial structures in place. And unfortunately, this is something that we've seen actually being abused by certain neocolonial leaders, the type of neocolonial leaders who hourly would promote African culture, but promote African values and that sort of thing in a very vague type of abstract way. And the reason why it's vague and abstract is because they're essentially using it as a guise to cover the fact that they're still neocolonialist. A prominent example, Joseph Mobutu, very vocal in terms of promoting traditional African culture in Congo, but at the same time, he was put in power by the Western powers. He was continued to be supported by the Western powers because he was serving their interest.
Right.
We do have that problem where African culture has often been used as a guise to uphold the colonial structures that were in place. So, in the situation of Trinidad and the situation in many Caribbean countries, that typically what we often see is that efforts undertaken by the governments of these nations are welcomed in the sense that we do need the cultural decolonization, but too often it's not really accompanied by a radical structural or political decolonization. And to be honest, with what I've seen from the government of Trinidad, that's not even it's not even the vision of the current Prime Minister, Ibrali. He doesn't obviously speak in the language of a revolutionary anti-colonial type of Pan-Africanism. That's not the ideology of the government of Trinidad. So to me, I see this as being mostly symbolic, but still important. The fact that it's symbolic doesn't lessen the importance of the cultural decolonization, but that's often been the issue, not only in the Caribbean, but among the larger global African population. The fact that, as I said, cultural decolonization often doesn't lead to structural decolonization. And, to go back to the Calypso art form, there was a great song about this by an artist out of Barbados, Kid Sight. He had a song on the Nelson statue called "Take Down Nelson," and for those who don't know, in Barbados there was a statue of a British colonial figure named Lord Nelson. So the argument he makes in the song is that Barbados has so many serious economic issues, so many serious social issues, and if the government of Barbados can't do anything to resolve the more serious issues, the more pressing material issues in the island, then at the very least they could take down the Nelson statue. There's no reason why the colonial statue should be in Barbados, and I thought that was an interesting commentary in the fact that, yeah, if Caribbean governments can't resolve more serious issues, issues that are more pertinent to the material conditions of the people on the island, at the very least, they could give us cultural decolonization. At the very least, take down the colonial statues and those things that are symbolic representations of colonialism. So I think it's important, but to go back to the main point of your question, that unfortunately, too often these things become symbolic, and it doesn't lead to the type of structural changes that are needed.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let me ask you this question. Do you think this move will help Trinidad and Tobago and other Caribbean nations? Reportedly, there are 14 Caribbean nations that are seeking reparations from the United Kingdom. Do you think this move would help them in their quest?
It would help in the sense that we need, not only in addition to cultural decolonization, psychological decolonization as well. And one thing that I actually have been very critical of in terms of how Caribbean leaders have been handling the reparations claim is that, to me, it seems like a contradiction to be trying to make a claim for reparations from the former colonial masters while you're still upholding the colonial legacy in your nation. To me, reparations should be accompanied with an understanding that we're seeking a complete liberation for African people, a cultural and psychological liberation for African people. So we can't accomplish this by upholding the same colonial structures, the same colonial symbols. So to me, it does help from a psychological standpoint that is creating the break that's needed. Another criticism I've made as well, particularly in the situation of Antigua and Barbuda that I've written about quite frequently, is that for those who don't know, what was going on in Antigua and Barbuda is that Barbuda has a very interesting history. After slavery ended, the Africans on Barbuda were more or less left to their own devices. So they created their own social structure that was rooted in a type of African communal system that they would have known from Africa, from ancestral memory. So in Barbuda, under the traditional system of land ownership, land is owned in common. There's no private land ownership. Anybody who wants to use the land for a particular purpose, it has to go through the council and do the collective.
Yeah, we find that same concept with the Gullah Geechee and the Sea Islands.
Yeah, and a similar type of history where when slavery ended, they still were able to retain a lot of their traditional social and political organizations. So in Barbuda, a few years ago, was hit by a hurricane. And the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda essentially has been, using that as an excuse to dismantle the traditional land ownership system in Barbuda and trying to privatize land under the guise of rebuilding the island and making the island profitable. And in the Caribbean context, profitable means tourists get to, the tourism industry takes over. Foreigners get to come build hotels and engage in that sort of thing. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is the Prime Minister, Gaston Brown. He's a very prominent spokesperson for reparations among the Caribbean leadership that are seeking reparations. Now, wouldn't it seem like a contradiction to you that the same Prime Minister who wants reparations for his people would also sell out the island of Barbuda to foreign influences that are only going to go there to exploit the masses? So to me, that's why I make the point that we need a psychological decolonization for reparations to be even effective, because otherwise what would happen is we'll get the reparations, but we would still be led by a leadership that's selling out African people to the colonial masters. So whatever benefits come from the reparations will likely go right back to the same colonial masters if we don't have the psychological understanding of what to even do with the reparations. So to answer that particular question, I think those type of measures are necessary simply because we do need some form of a psychological decolonization, we do need some form of being able to psychologically detach ourselves from the colonial masters, before we even have a conversation about what to do with reparations.
I would agree. I would agree. Now, you talked about structural decolonization. Could you provide some examples of what structural decolonization would look like?
So, Barbuda, that would be a great starting point. That structural decolonization would mean developing a type of society that's rooted in African cultural norms, African traditions, African ways of doing things, rather than the colonial structures, the colonial ways of doing things. And in the Caribbean context, one of the issues with economic development is because of the way those islands were developed, because of the structure of Caribbean islands being relatively small compared to most nation states across the world, and being also very much disunified. Throughout the years, throughout the decades, rather, there've been various calls towards Caribbean unification, and unfortunately, we haven't actually reached the point where the Caribbean is as unified as it needs to be. So, as a result of this division, it makes it very easy for these islands to be exploited, and it also restricts a lot of the avenues for development that Caribbean islands have. So, I mentioned tourism. A lot of Caribbean islands continue to rely on tourism, and tourism becomes very exploitative for many Caribbean islands. Exploitative in the fact that a lot of the tourist industry is actually controlled by foreigners. A lot of the hotels are controlled by foreign industries, foreign companies that are not from the island. Another issue that starts happening when we talk about tourism in the Caribbean, certain islands develop a culture where, because these are entities that are not owned by locals, they start privatizing certain properties. So now throughout the years, we've had a lot of issues in Caribbean islands about beaches being privatized, to where if you are local, you are banned from your own beaches because the beaches are reserved for tourists, the beaches are reserved for foreigners. So essentially, you start feeling like a foreigner in your own country, and the country then becomes a country that's more or less there, existing for the benefit and for the enjoyment of tourists. And if you're local living on the island, you don't get to enjoy that benefit. I always make a comment that the way tourism in the Caribbean is marketed in the United States and Europe is almost like the Caribbean islands are paradise. So it's a paradise for foreigners who come there as tourists, but for the people who are actually living there, the conditions are far from being a paradise.
Very true. I can speak to that as having visited, the Caribbean and Central America, numerous countries that, as an African American, I was keenly aware of my first world privilege. But in the same light, same vein of Marcus Garvey, if anyone has read a biography of the history of the Honorable Marcus Garvey, let's make sure I put some respect on his name. It talked about Marcus Garvey, and he was working for, I think, the United Fruit Company. And he was traveling throughout the Caribbean and South America. He saw the deplorable, what he would call deplorable conditions that African people lived in. And it moved him to want to do something about that. And so I would argue that I had that same feeling, that really echoing your sentiments. We've had this conversation offline on several occasions where you say that part of our work must be to improve the material conditions of African people at home and abroad.
Yeah, so and actually that's what I was about to say about from firsthand experience, from things you've told me, particularly in Jamaica, that you've seen what life is like for people who are living there. But for tourists, that's not the experience most tourists get. They get to benefit from the best parts of Jamaica, from the paradise type of ideal that's promoted. So that'd be one aspect of the problems with the colonial structure of these islands, that these islands still very much exist for the benefit of foreigners who exploit the resources and exploit the islands, and the locals really don't benefit very much from that. So when I talk about a type of structural decolonization, that's more or less what I'm referring to, that a complete shift in the structure of these societies. And I would also make the argument that part of the structural change needs to be a greater shift towards Caribbean unification, simply for the fact that too often what's happened in the Caribbean is that individual nations that have tried to break away from the colonial structures and tried to become more independent, they become very easy targets. And I mean, I'm sure you know the history of Haiti and everything that Haiti suffered because of Haiti's success with the revolution. Cuba, this is a very much discussed aspect of America's foreign policy in the United States. The ongoing embargo in Cuba, and the only reason why the embargo is there is because of the Cuban Revolution and the attempts to break away from American influences and American imperialism in Cuba. Grenada, during the period of time when Grenada had its revolution, that revolution was very much opposed by Ronald Reagan. So we see that in instances where individual Caribbean nations try to pursue the type of structural decolonization that I'm referring to and become more independent and even have revolutions that seek to radically overthrow colonial structures, these nations become very easy targets for the larger, more powerful Western imperialist states. So that to me, another aspect of the structural decolonization needs to be a move towards Caribbean unification and Caribbean integration. Because I mean, another thing that's really backwards to me and to a lot of Caribbean people, that as an American traveling throughout the Caribbean on an American passport, you have an easier time moving from island to island than people who actually live there, who are
Right.
using Caribbean passports to travel from island to island. So that'd be another example of a first world privilege that, you know, as an American, actually it is easier to travel throughout the Caribbean than it is for a lot of Caribbean people to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me ask this question. The family, if you're watching, make sure you hit the like button, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. We got far too many people watching. We got to get those thumbs up. Make sure you hit the subscribe and like button on both networks, Frequent Network and of course Lumumba Speaks. Hit the subscribe and like button as well as a notification bell. So we're talking about reparations, and you've always made the argument that you have a position on reparations that would maybe upset many. But do you mind sharing that?
Yeah, so the reason why I say that is because my position on reparations is there is no Western state right now that is going to give African people reparations. It's not in their interest to do so. It's not in their benefit to do so. So my argument has always been that we can't seek reparation from a place of powerlessness as a people. We need some form of a leverage that we can hold
Right.
over, you know, these Western states. Because I mean, we've been seeing this over the years. You know, Caribbean nations have been asking for reparations for a while. They still haven't gotten it. So asking politely for reparations doesn't appear to be the way that African people can go about getting reparations. So to me, I always make the argument that there are certain things that we need to take care of internally as a people before we can get to the conversation about reparations. Part of it is, as I alluded to before, making sure we have the proper leadership in place, making sure that the leadership that we have as African people is not the type of leadership that's going to continue to sell us out, continue to pursue policies that are detrimental to what we need to do as a people, even as they're advocating for reparations. But the other thing that we need to do is, as I pointed out, develop a base of power, develop some form of leverage that we can have over Western nations to really give them some type of incentive to provide reparations, some type of incentive to do those things. Because we would know from studying the history of the African struggle that no Western colonial power does anything because African people ask nicely, and very often, you know, it's actually taken very violent armed liberation struggles to get that. For example, I mentioned the Haitian Revolution. Enslaved Africans in Haiti would not have gotten their liberation simply through asking nicely from the French. That just it wouldn't happen.
Or protesting. Right.
Protest, because even I was going to say, even the civil rights movement, you know, the civil rights movement now is often framed as it was a non-violent, peaceful type of movement. But the reality is there were a lot of violent riots and rebellions that also played a role and shifted public policy in terms of the reason why the American government took the actions it took. Malcolm X always made the point that Kennedy really only got seriously interested in civil rights after rioting in Birmingham, in which a police officer was stabbed. So I make that, you know, I make those points to show that, like I said, historically, we're not dealing with people who ever act in the best interest of African people simply because we make those requests. So my particular critique of where I see the reparations movement at right now, I think it's a bit premature. I think, you know, if we're asking for reparations without some type of power, then as I said, you know, we're premature. I think we need to fix and take care of some things internally as a people before we can even begin to think about reparations. Otherwise, we're just going to continuously be asking for reparations from people who have no intention of giving reparations.
Understood. But if that conversation was to take place and we actually were in a position to, in your opinion, demand reparations, how would African people be able to go about supporting those hard asks, I would argue, globally?
So again, it goes back to, you know, what I was saying about the importance of building power, and I think there definitely is power in Pan-Africanism. There's power in being able to connect and link up internationally. I gave some examples earlier about how the anti-colonial liberation struggles on the continent were struggles that were directly supported by Pan-Africanists in the Caribbean. These are struggles in which Pan-Africanists in the Caribbean provided resources, provided funds, provided the ability for Africans to be able to arm themselves and to engage in the type of efforts that they needed to engage in. So, in terms of reparations, assuming we take care of the things that I said we need to take care of in terms of getting proper leadership in place, and in terms of really building that power base, to me, what a Pan-African reparations effort would look like is African people being able to come together on an international level and really have these discussions about what type of supports that they need, what their aims and objectives are, what the goals are, and the type of support that they need to obtain these objectives and goals. And when I say this, I'm not just speaking in terms of a hypothetical of what Pan-Africanism should look like in practice. This is how I practice Pan-Africanism. For many years now, I've been involved in the revolutionary struggle in Togo. And how my involvement in that struggle started was just by reaching out to brothers and sisters who were Togolese who were involved in the struggle and asking them, what type of support do you need? How can I support your efforts? How can I support your movement? So in terms of reparations, to me, that's how it would look like. So, for example, if African Americans are seeking reparations, what that looks like in terms of a Pan-African movement behind it, it would be Africans from other parts of the world, connecting with our African American brothers and sisters, and finding out, how can we support these efforts. What are the resources? What things do you need from us to move forward in your efforts? And it would be African Americans doing the same thing. So to me, that's what Pan-Africanism has to be about. What I think we should avoid doing is the type of Pan-Africanism that says, even though I'm not from your country, I instinctively know better. I know more about your struggle than what you know, so I need to go in there and dictate to you how it is that you should be struggling. I think as Pan-Africanists, that's what we need to avoid. So within the context of reparations, that's how I would envision it to be: African people supporting each other in the different ways that we need support. And it should never be a competition or a fight among us over reparations or how to go about getting reparations.
Absolutely, because there are some who make the argument that in order to receive reparations, one has to, of course, actually show their lineage, right? Identify their lineage.
Yeah.
Which you could make your argument for that, but part of that is also rooted in trying to disassociate themselves with Black people from other nations, other countries, where I think it's nonsensical. And so many would argue that it's more so promoting the division of individuals or using reparations as a reason to engage in, I would argue, a form of Americanized tribalism, right? And so that is, of course, an issue of concern, that you do not have to not be in solidarity with African people in order to advocate for reparations from whatever political entity or state caused our social, political, and economic quagmire.
Yeah, and I think there's also a lot of confusion around trying to frame reparations in terms of lineage, because typically when we think of reparations, and the examples we could point to of groups that receive reparations, it's not done via lineage. It's done through recovering for a particular harm, a particular damage. So when we think of the Japanese, for example, receiving reparations for being forced into internment camps, that wasn't reparations for being of a Japanese lineage. It was reparations for specifically being a victim of a harm, or potentially being a descendant of a victim of a harm. So that wasn't done on the basis of lineage. So to me, when we're thinking reparations, either it have to be on the basis of a particular harm, or on the basis of a nation. So an example I could use is I don't know how many people are aware of this, but Nicaragua actually sued the United States in the international court and won. And those were reparations due because the United States was actually engaged in a destabilization effort against Nicaragua. Now, subsequently, the United States never actually paid the amount that was found due to Nicaragua in the judgment. But the reason why I mentioned that is because, as I said, typically reparations is because you're part of a group that suffered a particular harm, or it is because you're part of a nation that suffered a particular harm. And the problem with the lineage movement is they're not really looking at African people as Black people as a particular group. But at the same time, they don't have a nation-state type of mentality either. So when we think of Black nationalism in the American context, one example of that would be the Republic of New Africa. The Republic of New Africa's argument was that African Americans are a distinct nation within a nation, and they were arguing for reparations on the basis of harms that had befallen the African American, or the New African, to use their language, the New African nation. So I think part of the confusion with these lineage-based reparations groups is they haven't really taken the time to study other reparations efforts to even see what reparations looks like. But as I pointed out, typically you don't just get reparations because of a lineage. You need to point to a particular harm, or you need to point to belonging to a group that's due compensation.
Right. And if just very quickly, when Nicaragua sued the United States in the international court, when did that take place?
I don't have the exact year off the top of my head, but it would have been sometime in the 1980s, because this was during the time where Ronald Reagan
Reagan.
was in
Yeah, I
Congress.
figured Reagan had something to do
Yeah,
with
yeah.
it. I figured
Yeah,
that.
what that was exactly, because he was supporting the Contras, who were engaged in a
Right.
violent counter-revolutionary struggle to
Mhm.
overthrow the government of Nicaragua. Obviously, financing violent rebel groups to overthrow a government is a violation of international law, which is why they took the United States to the International Court. So, and as I said, subsequently Nicaragua actually won that case, but the United States just said that they aren't paying. And actually, I didn't even think about this, but that's a great example of what I mean by you need power. Because if Nicaragua could actually take the United States to court and win the case, and the United States says we're still not paying, like I said, you need some type of power or leverage to make these people pay reparations. Because if the United States says, "Hey, I'm not going to pay the reparations," what are we going to do about it?
Right. Absolutely. So, family, if you're watching, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. You're watching Bequaline Network in LumumbaSpeaks.com, a dual stream. Bequaline Network, as you all know, is the Pan African social media extraordinaire, the home of African Center news and information. And of course, Lumumba Speaks, the Black Empowerment Initiative, where we believe we can gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. I'm going to put the link in the chat, family. The link is now in the chat. You can tap in, join the conversation. I'm quite sure you have several questions for, of course, the man, the myth, the world-renowned historian, Brother Dwayne Omawale, who I believe at latest count has written 27 or 28 books on the history of African people throughout the world, scholar, and of course, Pan-Africanist, and of course, the resident historian here at Lumumba Speaks and Bequaline Network. Your favorite Pan-Africanist, and your favorite historian. So the link is in the chat, family. The link is also in the description if you want to tap in and be part of the conversation. We're talking Trinidad and Tobago, the Twin Island Nation. Redraws its coat of arms to remove Christopher Columbus's ships. And so we want to know, asking the question, is this a move toward Pan-Africanism? Many would argue, why are you harping on Pan-Africanism? Every time we come on the channel, it's Pan-Africanism this, Pan-Africanism that. And I would think, of course, of the wisdom of Kwame Ture, also known as Stokely Carmichael, where he taught us that the highest form of Black power is, of course, Pan-Africanism. And we even see in the United States State Department, they released a memo years ago that argued that the major threat, the preeminent threat to, of course, U.S. imperialism was not a radical Islamic extremist, but, of course, Pan-Africanism. So we understand, our enemies, we can argue, understand the power of Pan-Africanism. And I think we need to understand the power that Pan-Africanism has, not only to address the menticide and miseducation that our people face. We talk about the cultural and psychological colonialism that we suffer, but also to actually change the material fortunes of African people at home and abroad. And I would argue some of the reasons why we find internally these issues take place in a myriad of aspects of African life is because of that lack of a Pan-African ethos and a Pan-African mindset and Pan-African values, where unfortunately, and many would argue this is an example of living in a capitalist, not only society, but world, where we become vulgarly individualistic and we focus on what we want rather than what is for the best for our community and the masses of African people. Any thoughts on that, Brother Dwayne?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think I've laid out a very strong case earlier for why it is that we need Pan-Africanism. It's just if we're confronting a situation where the Western colonial powers are always unified when it comes to asserting their interest against African people, I don't see how we overcome that being disorganized, disunified, and fighting among themselves. Because that I always make this point that when you look at the history of the Western colonial powers, they fought some very destructive, very bloody wars among each other.
Right.
So one of the few things that really unifies these countries is oppressing African people, oppressing non-European people. That's about the only time that we see Europeans really unifying in that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm just looking at a post Brother Biqualine posted on Twitter where he argued, where he reposted a sister, where she says Negroes want to delineate, argue over culture, and separate from each other at the same time. White supremacy is flourishing. Neo-Nazi militias form nationwide. Racists want to strengthen international alliances and maintain dominance. That's what got us enslaved the first time. So there's something to consider. You know, we talk about those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. And so we definitely don't want to fall for the same tricks of the trade, as some would argue, that we did hundreds of years ago. So definitely, family, want you all to tap in, be part of the conversation. This is a bit more of an intellectual conversation as it needs to be, right? We don't want to, of course, provide space for nonsensical arguments and behavior. And of course, as you all know, here at Bequaline Network and Lumumba Speaks, this is not the home of liquor store scholarship, right? So we want to make sure that when we're disseminating information for the masses, whether it be small or large, that we are disseminating information that is factual and is able to be substantiated, right? We don't want to be of the ilk who is simply, some would argue, a rabble rouser and just, just talking for the sake of talking. We want to make sure that the content that we're providing is meaningful, purposeful, and actually will help our people change their lives for the better. So once again, family, the link is in the chat. The link is in the description. You're more than welcome to tap in, be part of the conversation. And we're here once again with the man, the myth, the legend. I can't say it enough. Your favorite historian's favorite historian, your favorite Pan-Africanist, favorite Pan-Africanist, Brother Dwayne Omawale. And we're talking, of course, Trinidad and Tobago, the Twin Island Nation, the home of the most Pan-Africanists, I would argue, per capita in the world. They've redrawn or have made the decision to redraw the coat of arms to remove Christopher Columbus's ships. We're now talking about the Nina de Pinta and I think the Santa Maria. And so, of course, the question is this a move toward Pan-Africanism? And, our work here is we want to always make sure that we strengthen our bonds to do as much as we can in the way that we can to make our communities and our people more beautiful and more powerful than they were when we began our sojourn on this planet. So, family, once again, tap in, be part of the conversation. But let me ask you this question, Brother Dwayne, because this is a current that we're seeing. We see this push in the Caribbean. It seems symbolic. We hope it could become substantial. Now we could kind of pivot across the pond, as they say in good old jolly London in the UK, to the African continent. We're seeing this push for Pan-Africanism in the Sahel region of Africa. Could you kind of make a connection there?
It's interesting you're talking about making a connection, because actually I do see a direct connection between some of the things we see taking place in the Caribbean and throughout the continent. And I would argue it's in a sense it is a resurgence of Pan-Africanism, because something that I point to that's very encouraging to me as a Pan-Africanist is and I mentioned this before about what's happening in Barbados, where they took down the Nelson statue. But the Prime Minister there, Mia Mottley, she actually is a very outspoken Pan-Africanist. So, what we see happening in the Caribbean right now is that she's, I would argue, the most beloved leader in the region, and certainly you can make a case even the most beloved prime minister in the history of Barbados. She the last two elections in Barbados, her political party swept the elections. She won every seat in Parliament. She has no opposition in the country. She's the only prime minister in the history of Barbados that's swept the elections and won every seat. So, as I said, you can make the argument that she is, might even be the most beloved political leader in Barbados' history, and certainly in the history of Barbados, she's the most outspoken in terms of being supportive of Pan-Africanism and advancing a Pan-African message. And we see the same thing on the African continent, that the Sahel states. It's inspiring a lot of optimism and a lot of hope among people across the continent. And those states right now, I would argue the eyes of the continent really are looking to those three states, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, particularly Ibrahim Traore, the leader in Burkina Faso. He seems to be, from what I've seen, he seems to be the most popular leader in Africa right now. So it's a similar type of situation where, because of what's happening in those states, it's really inspiring a new type of hope and a new type of inspiration pertaining to Pan-Africanism, and pertaining to not only Pan-Africanism as a movement that could lead towards cultural decolonization, but Pan-Africanism as a movement that could lead towards political decolonization, structural decolonization. So it's a similar type of thing where we're seeing on the African continent a generation of new Pan-African leaders emerging, a generation of Pan-African leaders who are challenging these colonial structures, challenging neocolonialism across the continent. And as I pointed out, right now in Africa, those three states seem to be leading the way in terms of the possibilities of building an actual Pan-African movement that's anti-colonial in nature. And now I pointed out there's a lot of optimism. There's a lot of hope. A lot of people across the continent are looking, to these states and hoping that these states will succeed in their efforts. But there are certain things happening that are points of concern for me. Starting with the fact that all three of these nations are essentially military regimes.
Yes,
these situations military, seize power, and they're still military regimes. Now, the justification for that is, these nations are dealing with issues of Islamic extremism, particularly Burkina Faso. I saw, recently they've had a very serious issue with Islamic extremism there. So part of what these military regimes are doing is trying to combat the extremism. Their argument is that they need to essentially stabilize the nations before there could be a transition towards civilian rule. But as I said, that is a point of concern that we know historically military rule tends to be very unstable. Military rule does open up the door for counter coups, for factions within the military itself to take over. Burkina Faso has a history of this. Thomas Sankara, his government was essentially a government that came to power through a military coup, and he was subsequently overthrown by factions within the same military government that opposed him. So, to me, there are those type of issues because these are still military regimes. But for the most part, right now, I think those countries are inspiring a lot of optimism and hope.
Absolutely, and of course, my son's favorite Pan-Africanist is Thomas Sankara. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate that Thomas Sankara was assassinated on my sister's 10th birthday.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. October 15th, 1987. So, sister, you're watching, I'm throwing your age out there, right? I'm aging you, but it's extremely unfortunate. We do know that the individual behind Thomas Sankara's assassination was working at the behest of the French government.
Yep.
So that is something that we want to make sure that we're aware of. So let me ask you this question, and I do agree. I am aware that these three nations, Nigeria, Mali, and of course Burkina Faso, have military governments. Some would make the argument, this is outside looking in, that having democratic governments hasn't helped these nations move forward in terms of developing the apparatus, politically, social, and economic, they need to actually allow the citizens to live lives that are unencumbered, right, for lack of better words. Do we need to have strongman governments in order for these type of things to happen?
No, so I would start by referencing my sister Frida Nabrima. She makes the argument in Togo, where she's from, and a big part of her activism is fighting dictatorship in Togo. That she points out that the regime in Togo has been making the case that democracy doesn't work in Africa, and her counterpoint is, but the government of Togo has never tried democracy. Togo has had a dictatorship for over 50 years now. So part of the issue with that framing, and I've seen it a lot, framing that, well, Africa doesn't need democracy doesn't work in Africa. The problem with that is most of the governments in Africa aren't really democratic in the sense that they're not really representing the interests of the masses, and a lot of them aren't even democratic in the sense that there aren't fair and free elections. That they're on paper they're elections, but the elections are rigged. There's a lot of irregularities. That's why we have so many situations where we have leaders in Africa who've been in power for decades now and aren't leaving because they rig every election. So I would argue that for many African countries, we don't even have a proper democratic system. But my particular issue with strongman governments is always the question of what happens when a strongman dies. Because typically the issue with a strongman government is everything is run through the leader, and leaders tend to be very autocratic. The leaders tend to control and run everything. I always give a particular example of Cote d'Ivoire under Félix Houphouët-Boigny. He was a strongman.
Yes, in the Cote. Yes, I got
it. Ivory Coast. Yeah, the English translation, Ivory Coast. So, he was a typical autocratic strongman leader, and he essentially held the nation together. And then when he died, the nation fell into civil war, partly because the whole structure of the country was around him. And when he died, everything
cult personality,
fell apart. So that's a big issue across Africa. Even Zimbabwe, we've had conversations about this, about Robert Mugabe. I've had a lot of pushback when Mugabe was alive because I had certain criticisms of the way he was managing the government there, certain policies he implemented. But one of the critiques I had was the fact that he was another strongman African leader who was in power for decades. And now he's dead and gone. And what's happening in Zimbabwe? We're seeing a complete, collapse of the economy. We're seeing situations where European farmers who had the land taken from them, land that they stole from African people that were taken, they're now being given those land back in terms of a compensation. So imagine a situation where Africans are having to give land back to European settlers and compensate them for the land that the Europeans stole in the first place. But this is what we see happening in Zimbabwe, and it's another situation where we had a strongman leader who was in power for decades, and he didn't really fundamentally transform the society. So now that he's dead and gone, and the society is still wrestling with issues that are left over from the strongman. So, best case scenario with strongman leadership is that you run into those type of problems where when the strongman is gone, if the strongman hasn't actually resolved those issues, then you're right back to addressing the same issues. The worst case scenario is the whole thing just falls apart because it was a house of cards being held together by one individual. So to me, those are very real issues that we've already seen across the African continent. The strongman leadership typically does not work because at some point the strongman leader has to die. Now, I know a lot of African leaders, they create these cult of personalities where they think they're invincible, they think they're immortal. Yahya Jammeh out of Gambia, according to him, Allah gave him a mandate in which he was going to rule the country for 1 billion years. He's not the leader of Gambia right now, so he didn't quite last 1 billion years that Allah told him he was going to have. Right. So, but that's the problem with these leaders. That a lot of them really believe that they've been destined by divine power to be where they're at. So just it creates all kinds of problems, and not even just from the top level, the level of leadership. It creates problems for the society itself, because what you find happening in a lot of countries that have had dictatorships, that have had leaders who develop cults of personality, the masses become accustomed to that. So now the masses themselves actually go looking for strongman leaderships, and something that Sarita has expressed to me, that this is nation Togo, where people in Togo feel that the only way to topple the dictatorship is by going and finding another strongman, someone who's even stronger than the current dictator, and putting that person in power. So it never reaches the point where the masses learn to act for themselves or to think for themselves. They're always looking for a strongman to lead them. So it also creates those problems as well in terms of at the mass level, at the grassroots level, not just in terms of the leadership and the political structure. So I would make the argument that strongman leadership, it doesn't work for African people. It hasn't worked, and I think you could even make an argument that it's actually anti-African in terms of when we look at the traditional structures of African civilizations.
Very true. Very true. So, family, if you're watching. Make sure you tap in. The link is in the description. The link is in the chat. Tap in, be part of the conversation. See, there's some questions or comments in the comment section. So Max asked the question. As you stated, this is an intellectual conversation, but the corner entertainer conscious groups seem to have more engagement. How can that be combated? I think that's a great question.
So I always tell people the main way to combat that is to, again, going back to when we talk about the material needs of the people, build strong movements, build strong organizations that are serving the material needs and the material interest of the people. Because the problem with entertainment is people could only be entertained for so long, and then reality hits them. So that's the thing I noticed with a lot of these so-called conscious entertainers, that they provide a sense of entertainment, and that could be funny for a little bit. It could last for a little bit, but I mean, I'm sure listeners have noticed, throughout the course of this conversation, when we talk about people like Thomas Sankara, people like Marcus Garvey, these are Pan-Africanists that left lasting legacies that we can still build on top of. The problem with the entertainers is they don't really leave lasting legacies. They leave entertainment. And, if we're being honest, a generation from now, how many people are even going to remember the entertainers or what the entertainers were doing? So to me, I always make the point that we can't be distracted by the fact that these people have more engagement. We just need to be focused on building movements that are going to serve the material needs of our people, and building movements that the next generation could come and take over from, that the next generation could build on top of, the same way we're building on top of the generations of Pan-Africanists that came before us. And the other point I would make too with the entertainers is that we also need to keep in mind that with social media, the primary objective of social media is entertainment. Social media is not there for intellectual discourse or that sort of work. Social media is not there for serious organizing work. Those are things that need to be done off of the social media spaces. Sometimes need to be done even offline. But social media is geared towards that type of not just entertainment, but a type of dysfunctional entertainment. I'm sure you'll notice that people in these so-called conscious spaces that get the most engagement tend to be very dysfunctional, tend to be people who are always getting in beefs, getting in disputes with other Black people, and that's a big part of the engagement. A big part of it is just people essentially looking at what's a train wreck. It's entertaining to people because they see this train wreck of different leaders fighting with each other and engaging in that type of dysfunctional behavior. It's not very much different than what we see with reality television. That reality television also caters to a type of dysfunctional type of behavior. So that's just the reality of where society is at right now. That a lot of it is just dysfunctional drama, and that's what gets engagement.
Absolutely. And Dale Moore asked a question: are there no Indigenous people there who have a story to tell? We need to know who are you referring to? How about sovereignty? So definitely tap in, Dale Moore, be part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's a very open-ended question.
And we have the man, the myth, the legend, the Pan-African organizer extraordinaire who just tapped in with us this afternoon. Jabril Africa, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing well.
We're talking about Somalia by way of the Twin Cities, holding it down all day, every day. All work is easy work, and he's repping the red, black, and green. Mr. Sandman, how you doing? Come straight out to Illidale.
Hey, how y'all doing, man?
Quite all right.
Happy Pan-African Sunday.
Absolutely. Happy Pan-African Sunday. Appreciate it. So, Brother Jabril, this is really your wheelhouse, right? We're talking about organizing. The question was, why is it that these corner entertainer conscious groups seem to have more engagement? Organizing is your wheelhouse. What is your response to that question? You're looking rather serious there. You look like you just came from the gym like me. It's all right, though. So what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, lost. I got lost for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, my connection cut out. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, well, yeah, you had frozen. Okay,
you said,
so that was
I lost you at where you said this is my wheelhouse.
Yes, your warehouse organizing, right? And the question was, this is more so an intellectual conversation rather than, I would argue, minstrel show, chitlin circuit type of entertainment. And so the brother Max asked a question. I would presume this is a brother. Max could be a sister. Don't want to misgender you. We're living in that type of world now. The corner entertainer conscious groups seem to have more engagement rather than brothers and sisters who are having serious intellectual conversations about how to better address the material conditions of our people. How can that be combated?
That's a great question. First, let's talk about why that's happening, right? Our people are confused. We're menticital, as Bobby E. Wright talked. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, as Bobby E. Wright talked about, we're menticital people, right? We're completely lost, and that affects itself. That shows itself, expresses itself in different ways. One of those ways is what you just mentioned, right? People are more concerned with those just confusion nests, as I call them, right? So how do we combat that, right? As Brother Dwayne said a couple minutes ago, we need to take care of our people's material needs, right? First and foremost. But we also need to organize our people and then educate them properly. You talk about proper propaganda as opposed to improper propaganda, which you'll find in a lot of these spaces, right? So that's really the solution. And I always tell brothers and sisters in the community this. I was just actually organizing a sister who's working in engineering and working with architects. So she's essentially like formed a Black-owned organization pertaining to that. And she's really interested in joining the organization me and Brother Dwayne are forming, the Organization for Universal African Sovereignty. But the way you go about resolving that is by organizing our people. That's the first step. That's the first stone. Once you take care of that, everything else, in my opinion, resolves itself within the organizational structure, right? So to answer your question, Brother Lumumba, proper propaganda, political education once they join the organization. I think that's the way. You're off mute, or you're on mute.
Yeah, he said he's out, so he asked us to take over.
Okay, got you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, can I chime in?
Yeah, he was.
Oh, yes, yeah. So, I got a little bit of history about Trinidad and Tobago. When I used to be in college in Connecticut, a good friend of mine who also played on the football team, he was from Trinidad and Tobago. They lived in Brooklyn, New York. New York City has a very large Caribbean population of people from different parts of the Caribbean. So I used to hang out with those guys in the Trinidad, and then I got introduced to this one food called the roti. and it's a curry dish, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's when I started to learn about the history of the Caribbean, where it has a large population or some history with Indians. From India, not the native Indian, but the Indians,
Yeah, East Indian. Yeah.
East Indian, yeah, or East Asian, I guess you could call them, or West Asian or Southwest Asian. I'm not sure what you might call them. Similar to what you might call Kamala Harris might be, and yeah, so that's how they got the curry dishes and the in Trinidad and stuff like that. So yeah, I loved it. The food, the dishes, and when I think about uh, taking that boat, Christopher Columbus's boat, off of the coat of arms of Trinidad and Tobago, I think that over the years, the group that has been most staunchly against uh, um, uh, holidays like Columbus Day have been the natives, the native Indians, because they seen like the introduction of Christopher Columbus to the New World or the Americas as a kind of like a genocide. So I'm not sure if they're associating removing Columbus with giving respect to the native Indians as opposed to giving respect to the Africans who came over there in slavery. So that's another interesting topic. But in regards to uh, building up our own economy, so the thing is about the psychological thing that you were getting at in regards to building our own financial infrastructure is we decide if we learned this by Coinbase digital currency like Bitcoin and stuff like that, that the people decide the value of your own economics or the value of your own currency. And there's different forms of trade. You can have the bartering system, or you can use capitalism, or you can use socialism. In regards to reparations, all you would be doing is taking money from the international uh, banks or what have you, and still you would be under the rule of a different country's economic system, because you would be trading all of your goods based on the value of their currency. So I think the first step will have to be first of all building up the education and the scientific literacy of the people in the Caribbean, so that we can build our own economic structure, whereas though we don't have to use other people's, or we don't have to import other people's goods, and we can only purchase it, and we can be completely independent on using our own goods, right, in our own ingenuity, and then trade internally and not be completely dependent on someone else's valuation of their currency. So as long as we're going to be more of a, and then once you create that infrastructure where you're the technology where you can, create your own goods, then that's when you start exporting more than you're importing. And when you start exporting more than you're importing, then you'll be in a surplus economically.
Yeah.
And that's when you start really feeling the comfort of a first world society. So I think the first step is the building up the technology or the educational infrastructure of the Caribbean, building up your own scientists, your own hospitals, your own food manufacturing plants, all that stuff, And then from that step, then you move forward to, and if you want to seek reparations, that's up to you. But like I said, or up to us rather. But like I said, money is just an idea. It's nothing really physical. It's based on a standard that someone else creates. So
Yeah.
you create your own standard of valuation for your currency, but asking for reparations from a different country. All you're doing is, I don't know. It's not a loan, because it'd be something that you would they owed you as a debt. However, you're still going to be trading your goods and purchasing your goods from their country. So all they're doing is recycling their own money because you're going to come right back to them to buy your TVs, buy your phones. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's the first step is the education, I believe.
And going back to reparations, you made a lot of great points, brother, the Sandman. Even if we talk about reparations, yeah, that is a right that is due to African people, whether they be in these states, pretty much globally. African people have been colonized everywhere on the planet. But if we think that we're going to be able to, within their political and economic system, if we're going to be able to get reparations going through that method, something that took 400, 500, matter of fact, thousands of years of bloodshed to acquire these resources, do we think they're just going to give it back by asking? Doesn't make any logical sense. It is a right that is due to African people the world over, including in these states specifically, but globally. But they're not going to give it up just by asking, right? You have to have power over them. You have to have some measure of something that is essentially that they need, right? So if we talk about African people, controlling our economic resources, controlling the resources of Africa would give us that leverage to get reparations, right? So that's one way of going about it. But they're not just getting to give it up just by going through, let's say, Congress. It's not going to happen. And even if it does, as brother Mr. Sandman pointed out, it's just going to go right back into their system, their economic system. Just like Nana Khalid Abdul Muhammad said, once they give us cash reparations, it's just gonna Cadillac is gonna come out with the reparations edition Cadillac, right? And Gucci, all those European brands that we envy so highly, it's just gonna go right back into them, right? So I'd be surprised if most African people in the diaspora or globally really would be able to keep that money within our own economy, right? Yeah, because we're not psychologically there. So, I mean, and we talk about cash reparations, that's a whole nother conversation, because why do we think that the generation or the Africans that are currently alive today deserve that? Only we deserve that, not the ones that came before us and not the ones that are coming after us, right? So I think we need to have a conversation about not just cash, but resources, right? Some of our brothers and sisters that go by New Africans talk about actually being given states within the United States of America. I have mixed feelings about that, but that's more practical than just getting in cash, right? Giving every African person in America or every descendant of enslaved Africans in America cash reparations or $1 million, that's not going to last, and that's not the right way to move forward, in my opinion.
Yeah, I believe countries or African countries like Nigeria is leading the way on technological ingenuity in all of the African nations. For now, I believe they have their own uh, vehicle manufacturing services. I don't believe they manufacture any planes or anything like that, but I think they're also on the cusp of also refining their own oil as well. So that's something that they could trade on. But yeah, like I said, or like you said as well, we have to be able to trade within ourselves in the Southern Hemisphere, whether it be the Caribbean or, Sub-Saharan Africa, our goods and services in between each other, and then build on. And in regards to power, if you do have, a lot of natural resources, and all that, and leverage. If we want leverage, then yeah, the only way to obtain power is through military might, and the only way that you can obtain military might in today's day and age is through technology. So at the present time, we don't have the military infrastructure to control our own goods and services, or from being taken from another country. So we have to start with the education, the technology base, build up a military, and then go from there.
No, you pointed it out perfectly, and I mean that's Pan-African nationalism, right? But another point that we're talking about that you point out is the resources, right? And essentially having resources move throughout the African diaspora. That's a Pan-African economic supply chain, right? Where you're moving goods, you're moving services throughout the entire African world. And that needs to be the goal of any person, any African person that's trying to bring about a new African world where we're not oppressed anymore. Not only are we not oppressed, we're thriving. You need a Pan-African economic supply chain. And as Mr. Sandman keeps pointing out over and over again, that's one of the main places our focus needs to be at as Black people globally.
Yes, absolutely. And also, what did you think about, because, a place like Trinidad and all over the Caribbean, there are people who aren't of entirely of sub-Saharan African lineage, like some of the Taino Indians or the native tribes of the Americas that also have a huge stake in a lot of those Caribbean countries. How does that work in regards to relationships with them? I mean, I could only island I could think of in the Caribbean that might be like completely majority people of sub-Saharan Africa, maybe Jamaica or Haiti. What about all of the
Tobago? Even though it's Trinidad and Tobago, Tobago is almost exclusively African as well.
Oh, okay.
Trinidad is a bit different. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the relationship in between the sub-Saharan African and also the native Indians, who might even have some Spaniard blood in them as well, or Hispanic blood in them as well, that relationship needs to be, there needs to be some type of give and take or relationship between them as well, so that you can have that infrastructure. Because for as long as they stay unified with the European powers, they're not going to have as much cooperation with us as necessary to really build that infrastructure between, the Caribbean and sub-Saharan African nations.
I have a slightly different opinion on that, brother, Mr. Sandman. Do you prefer to be called Mr. Sandman or just Sandman?
Oh yeah, something. It's when we having these serious conversations like that, I know it's like it feels awkward to say such a silly name like that. And I explained to Lumumba before why I had created that name. It was an old rap name from 20, 30 years ago when I was in high school, when I used to be a music artist. And I know it sounds stupid, but it was my first rap name, and I never changed it. But I would say maybe that you could just call me DJ. That's what my family calls me.
Okay, bet. So, brother DJ, my opinion on that is different, right? Because I understand on a base level, the first law of nature is self-preservation, right? So, African sovereignty benefits no group of people outside of ourselves, right? So basically what I'm pointing out is if it benefits, one of your examples is the Tainos in the Caribbean. If it benefits them to betray African people, they're going to do that. And matter of fact, the question we need to ask ourselves in this specific example that you gave us, brother, is why would they side with African people when Europeans are there and Europeans control a lot of that landmass and have ties with them? Why would they choose Africans over Europeans, right? Because on a base level, all groups of people that aren't black and white, and even the only people who are actually confused about that is black people, right? They know the relationship, non-Africans know the relationship between Europeans and African people, right? Why would they choose our side? It's not beneficial to them. Like I said, first law of nature is self-preservation. My focus, my organization's focus is on organizing, uniting African people the world over, not being too much concerned. Yes, we're going to have to, we live in a world where we're going to have these things, these barriers that get in our way. And yes, oftentimes it's going to not just be white people, it's going to be non-Africans as well. But I know that African people don't need to rely upon another group of people, including Taino Indians, to gain sovereignty. We can do that all on our own. There's over 2 billion African people on the planet. The resources the world depends on is not in the Caribbean, though they are important. It's in Africa. It's about controlling Africa and controlling our resources in Africa. So that's my position on that, brother, DJ.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. The only issue I have with that is the military support. So as we all know, there's pirates all over the oceans. You know, our world is like what
Yeah.
70% water. So you have to have the military infrastructure, the Navy or what have you, that can guarantee the transportation of your supply goods that will come from the Caribbean back and forth from the Caribbean and sub-Saharan Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to start there, and then the
Mm-hmm.
Navy, whatever military forces that you would have in the seas, it would have to also be supported by some type of aerial military infrastructure as well.
Yeah.
So first, we would have to start with building up a security infrastructure. It could be either governmental, national, or it could even be a private security service where we can guarantee that the supplies would travel back and forth across the ocean safely without being stolen or looted by pirates and other people and other thieves. So it's a lot of logistics that has to be sorted out before we can really have a serious supply chain back and forth across the oceans.
And that's what we need to develop as African people, right? But I'll give you an example. So my position is what we need to look at is what the Sahel Alliance, the nations in the Sahel, are currently doing, right? They're literally going to war. They're going to war with the West. They're going to war with the United States of America, NATO, all of that, right? That's the blueprint. And my goal, what I hope, is that the Sahel Alliance is just the beginning. It'll start with 3 nations, go into 5, 10, 15, and then that'll actually be the true African Union. That's what I foresee. And I hope, and not hope, what we're going to do, our organization, is we're going to help bring about that world. But yeah, Mr. Sam, DJ, it's not simple. Like these things, they're simple, but they're not easy to do, right? It's going to take a lot of work to do, but it's straightforward. What we need to do is very straightforward. The war African people are in and have been for thousands of years is straightforward. It's a race war. Don't let Marxists confuse you and tell you it's just about class. No, class is a part of it, but it's not the primary reason. It's race, first and foremost. And that's why we need to unite as African people globally.
Yeah, absolutely. Only issue that I find a problem with the Sahel and those countries fighting Western powers is what military equipment are they using to fight those powers?
Russian military equipment.
Yeah, so that's an issue.
Yeah, I know. It's an issue for me. Dwayne, me and my brother Dwayne have had many conversations about this. It is an issue for me as well. Yeah, it is an issue for me as well. But my aspirations and what we're trying to bring about is that they don't have to rely upon Russia, and I think that can be done within the near future, and that's the goal.
Right.
Only reliant upon their African brothers and sisters, and to be honest, a lot of what I've seen from our brother in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, which is my favorite president as well, Dwayne. I remember you said earlier he's a favorite president in Africa. He's my favorite president as well. From what I'm gathering, I believe he would be open to that world that we're trying to bring about, right? And not needing to rely upon Russia's aid in any way, shape, or form. So that's the goal, brother. It's not easy, but it's simple. We just need to do work. A lot of times also, Brother Lumumba brought this up, and it might have been you, DJ, that brought this up. Like, we're in these spaces and people just talk all day. I mean, like, you have YouTube channels where it's just black people talking all day about the issues. It's even worse. You got some YouTube channels, and I won't name them. Now they're cursing each other out, calling each other all sorts of names. And these are people that told you they studied under Nana John Henry Clark or sat at his feet. Nana Ben, right? Nana Khalid Abdul Muhammad, actually the one that I'm thinking of specifically said he was under Nana Khalid Abdul Muhammad, right? But on a base level, these ancestors would detest everything you're doing. You're not doing any work. You're just sitting talking and cursing out other brothers and sisters. You're a waste, as Nana Kwame Ture, another ancestor from Trinidad and Tobago, would say. It would be better if you were actually brought to this planet as a cow, because we'd actually have more use out of you than in your current form, right? So that's the thing. We need to stop just talking and getting on these platforms and just talking. And Brother Lumumba knows I just don't got the time to be on the line. He invites me all the time. I try to make it when I can, but I'm more focused on organizing. We need spaces like this, don't get it wrong. But ideally, spaces like this would be for people that are doing the work, coming back together and building on that work we're actively doing. Not just people talking about, oh, this is what we can do, this is the problem. But when they leave, when they press this leave button, they do nothing. They just go back to their regular 9 to 5 and just work for non-Africans and don't do anything to bring about the world that they want to bring about, or they talk about wanting to bring about, right? That's a shame to me. That's high hypocrisy. What are you doing?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and I think, you know, some of the more intelligent Africans have to come to a realization that there's a intelligent bell curve or intelligence bell curve, whereas though, you know, there's a percentage of people, there's a percentage of people that are below average intelligence. The vast majority of people are right around average intelligence, and then there might be people like you and Dr. Lumumba and
Brother Dwayne.
And Brother Dwayne, who might be above average, you know, intelligence. So if you're going to have like in-depth conversations with the people who might not be intellectually endowed as yourselves, then they can't really engage in the conversation that you're having. So, you know, I think we have to come to that realization that the majority of people are probably about 90% of Africans, or just people in general, are average to below average intellectually. So, I mean, there's ways that you can improve our intellect by reading more and stuff like that. But a lot of it's stuff that you're born with or innate, you know, as well. So, yeah, I understand. So when you talk about like these platforms where where they're arguing and talking about, you know, stuff that don't really make any sense or that isn't beneficial to the plight that we're going through or the movement that we're trying to make, just understand that, you know, that's the frequency that they're on right now, and to elevate themselves, it's going to take some time and maybe even some natural selection to get a group above that bell curve so that they can have in-depth conversations with you and the doctors.
Yeah, my thing is these conversations, and you make some valid points for sure, Brother DJ. My thing is these platforms don't always have to be intellectual debate. It can be brothers and sisters coming on a panel like this, educating each other, right? So I wouldn't always view it that way. Of course, if someone has a different opinion, it can turn into a debate, as we see often in these spaces, but it doesn't have to be. It can be, you know, an opportunity for teaching, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that if you don't find yourself on a level to be able to have the intellectual conversation that you're going through, then it'll be just a good place to come sit and watch, you know, and learn. And then once you get your knowledge base up, then you can interact with the conversation and give your own opinions.
I hear that.
Yeah, because there's a different type of intellectuals. There's the intellect. There's your logic intellect, you know, and there's also emotional intelligence as well. All different types of spatial intelligence.
Yes.
All different types of intelligence. So, you know, just because someone might not be the best at logic or in common sense, they might be really good at emotional intelligence, and emotional intelligence is key for, you know, galvanizing people and getting them behind you, because most people, or the majority of people, are influenced by emotional connections. So yeah, we just got to learn how to get everybody involved as well, and have them utilize their innate talents for the overall benefit of the movement.
Yep, innate African brilliance, and we're all we're all brilliant in our different ways, as you pointed out, brother DJ. For sure, I unite with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brother Lumumba, you back?
Yes, I am.
We held it down.
Yeah, but appreciate it. Back like I never left.
Yeah.
Great conversation. This is the type of conversation that I needed, where we actually are solution based. I always tell people, part of the goal of Pan-Africanism is that wherever you are and wherever you're doing, you use that in a manner to make sure that you're helping African people, right? So it doesn't matter if you're at the rec center, right, or if you're leading a fitness, or you got a walking group in your local neighborhood. You use that time to organize and address the issues that African people face at home and abroad. So I always give the example, shout out to my hometown, 937 DYT, the Gym City. You know what it is, Dayton, Ohio for life. Yesterday was Dayton View Day. So, I gotta give a shout out to my hometown. And you all smiling, right? I can't help it. Hometown pride. And there was an issue, particularly, growing up. Of course, I unfortunately was a victim of the miseducation machine, what most people call the public school system, not the public school system. When I became an adult, I'm going to do, and people were complaining about the educational system. I, at the time, was a young adult. I'm in college studying Black studies, so I'm Black power militant to the core. And we're philosophizing and talking about these issues. Somebody said, "Well, what are y'all gonna do about it?" Like, we were being challenged, brother, a sister, Mama Renee, who has the McClendon Center, which is a cultural center where they teach African drum and dance. She said, "Hey, we're going to create a Juma Mosi Shule. It's the African Center Saturday School." She said, "Bakari, I already know that you get up on Saturday mornings and you go to the gym. So are you willing to sacrifice your gym time on Saturday morning to come down here from 8 to 1 and help with the Juma Mosi Shule?" I said, "Not only would I help, I said, I also bring my children." Right? So we fed the young brothers and sisters, the Watoto at 8, reading, writing, and arithmetic, chess, African history. We even mixed in some martial arts, and then they left with lunch. Right? So part of it is just doing the work. That's really part of it, right? And I'm not saying this to try to, push my Black resume, but I think it's important that, once again, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, that is an opportunity to address the issues that African people face. And you don't have to be demonstrative. You don't have to be a rabble rouser. All you gotta do is put in the work. That's it, I always tell people, the African proverb states what? Talking doesn't fill a bread basket. I can recall my days back when I used to box. I can't box anymore. I don't have the reflexes. If I got in the ring, I get my ass whooped. I'm just going to be completely honest. I'm not what I used to be. I don't have the reflexes anymore. But I remember, one of the big things regarding boxing, most people think it's a macho sport. You can make the argument it's a macho sport, it's a gladiator sport. But the biggest aspect of boxing is cardiovascular. You got to get your ass up in the morning and go running. Right? And I couldn't talk my way out of that. I had a fight with a Mzungu. First round, we even. I'm making them miss. I'm Floyd Joy Mayweather in that motherfucker. You know what I mean?
Don't disappoint us. You better have won that.
Listen. First off, don't cut me off. First off, don't cut me off. Okay, I'm gonna tell you right now. I'm gonna tell my story. I'm like, second round, I start gassing. He starts touching me a little bit more. The third round, listen. Fatigue makes a coward of us all. And guess what? I realized you better start getting your behind up in the morning and running. Because this was someone I was better than, right? But fatigue makes a coward of us all. So all I'm saying is we just have to put the work in. And I understand, sometimes we're unmotivated to do the work. Right, I went to the gym this morning, knocked out those shoulders. You know what I mean? Still could bang head bounce a little bit. You know what I'm saying? I say that to say some of our best workouts is when I don't feel like working out. Some of the best work we can do is when we don't feel like doing the work for our people. Right? So that's what I would say to that, brother Sandman. Discipline
is what you're referring to. Yeah.
Yeah, so brother Jamon93 says, I'm not sure about the bell curve IQ thing. It has some roots in eugenics. I would agree there. Once again, brother, I know you're out. You said you're out at the moment, but you could tap in. I'm going to put the link in the chat. Once again, you do not have to cam up. You do not have to use your actual name. You can use a pseudonym. But love, for you to actually provide a differing perspective. Once again, this is the space of Black empowerment. Right, we believe in the 3 N's of Black power: self-respect, self-defense, and of course, self-determination. And so this isn't going to be an argument, but we definitely believe that we can have a more robust conversation when we have differing viewpoints. So it's no problem there. But I do need to go over the ground rules very quickly. And those ground rules are very important, because if you do not abide by those ground rules, I will kick you out of here. And brother Dwayne and brother Jabril and even Mr. Sandman, they've been on here where people came in acting like they had no sense whatsoever, and I act like I was the brother that was Apollo when I yanked them off the stage. So once again, diversity of thought is welcome, irrespective if you're on the left, you're on the right, or you're right down the middle. You could be conservative, you could be an integrationist, you could be a Marxist, you can be a card-carrying member of the Pan-Africanist clan. You could be part of this conversation. No racial epithets of any kind are allowed. Once again, no racial epithets of any kind on my platform are allowed. If you use a racial epithet, you will be removed from the live immediately. I don't play that whatsoever, particularly in my personal life. I had a conversation with someone at work about that. I can let you all know about that a little bit later. Facts over feelings. So if someone makes an argument you disagree with, no problem. You attack the argument, not the person. We don't deal with ad hominems, right? This isn't 6th grade where someone says something you don't like and you say, well, that's why you're a booty head. We don't play those games. And then, of course, no fundamentally false statements. You can have an opinion, but no fundamentally false statements. An example of a false statement is Michael Jordan is the best player in the world because LeBron James only won 2 championships. LeBron James won 4 championships. While you can have an opinion, Jordan's the GOAT, but you can't make a claim that is patently false. And our mission here at Lumumba Speaks and Be Quiet Network is to neither exonerate or vilify, but to challenge conventional wisdom and re-examine what has previously been accepted as fact.
Yeah, and if I could make a comment about the bell curve,
Go right
thing,
ahead.
if you don't mind. Yeah, it does probably have some roots in eugenics, but however, we might have to come to the realization, even though eugenics has some roots in anti-Africanism or some heinous crimes that were committed by utilizing the findings in it, we might have to come to the realization, or maybe even you can give your opinion. I was thinking about it. So say we were brought over here as Africans in bondage, right? On the bottom of slave ships across, that took months to get over here, right? So the people that survived that that journey were some of the more physically endowed Africans that made it across the ocean. And a lot of us perished on those boats and were even dumped into the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. How many of those Africans that were dumped in the bottom of the ocean because they couldn't survive the passage were some of our most brilliant Africans, And what about all of the guys that did survive? Maybe that was some of our strongest and most robust Africans, So it's the thing when it comes to evolution, or we're talking about people and their innate abilities. There's this thing called natural selection, and women have a tendency, when they have the freedom, to choose or start to choose men who they believe have more of the stronger genes that they think would be beneficial for their offspring. So they'll choose a man who they believe is funny, or they'll choose a man who they believe is brilliant, or sometimes they might even choose a man who they believe is physically endowed. And those traits or genetic traits get passed down from generation to generation. Unfortunately for us, because we were in bondage and chattel slavery, particularly in the United States, the white people that were enslaved us forced us to and breed a certain type of African, as opposed to an African that might be more intellectually endowed. So there is some roots in eugenics in the history that we have here, and of course there are some intelligent Africans who may have come across the ocean and made it, made it this far, but it's going to take some time before the population of innate or highly logical or highly intelligent Africans can grow.
So I'm going to respectfully disagree. So I think there's a couple things. One, you talk about natural selection. We do know that the concept of natural selection is a derivative of course, of eugenics. The second issue, when you talk about having innate behavioral characteristics, that of course is rooted in a concept known as essentialism. Many of you who are aware of critical race theory, one of the core tenets of critical race theory is anti-essentialism, right? We actually find that embracing essentialism actually does more harm than good. The concept that Black people are inherently athletic and good at music. I can't rap to save my life. When I try to rap, my daughter tells me, "Stop it before you hurt yourself," right? But I do have a mark for, of course, engaging in writing and scholarly research, right? So I think that's one issue, right? I think the other issue when we talk about women and dating preferences, oftentimes, unfortunately, a lot of women's dating preferences, particularly we could even say from a modern standpoint, are atavistic in nature, right? This is typically why, even if we look at from a traditional African family reference, not only your parents involved, but oftentimes your entire family and even the community is involved, right? Because they can see things that you can't see. They could see beyond, excuse me, the present, right? And so I would argue that wouldn't be a good frame of reference. But I think the other issue when we talk about this concept of intellectualism, I think we also have to understand that African people were socially engineered, and it was codified by law to not be able to engage in intellectual discourse, right? To not engage in the ability to read, write, and use arithmetic, right? So I think we need to understand that as well. But irrespective of those repressive laws, we still find that we was able to use not only our guile and adaptive vitality and ingenuity to what? Free ourselves and free ourselves and become the most prominent creators here in the deaf, decadence, and dysphoria of the Western diaspora, right? So I think those are things that we need to consider. Now, I would argue that when we talk about this concept of anti-intellectualism, we also understand that we are not we don't live in a bubble, right? We live in America, and American culture is anti-intellectual in nature as well. So oftentimes the anti-intellectualism that we find in our communities is a product of not only American culture, pop culture, and of course the public fool system.
Yes.
And I would give an example of, I'm going to tell some of my life story right now, right? Man, and I tell you, it'll be a bestseller, right? There was a situation where this is after I was kicked out the Navy. I've never, shied away from admitting that I was kicked out the United States Navy. And so I'm back home. I'm hanging. I'm kind of in the hood doing things. I was a miscreant, right? And so we're at my homeboy's house, and some of their friends is over there, and we're smoking weed through a bong. And a sister was talking about, I'm thinking about, going to college and just starting off at a community college. And I talked her out of it. I said, that's dumb as hell. And the community college ain't nothing but a 13th school. And everyone's laughing and joking. But that was representative of what? My ignorance. Right? And part of that was what, unfortunately, the unhealthy racial identity that I had. I had a very unhealthy concept of what it meant to be Black. Right? And so as a result, I, of course, viewed and spoke illy of people who were educated and sought education. Right now, once I got around some Black folk who are actually serious about being Black and serious about life, serious about being African, my perspective changed. So I would argue that unfortunately, a lot of this comes from the miseducation and the continued negative programming and propaganda that we are subjected to that cause us to disabuse education for things like sports and, of course, entertainment.
Yeah, I would agree. And, particularly when we're talking about natural selection, and that's a culture that was more readily available or readily practiced in Africa. But over here in the United States, if we're talking about the Caribbean.
Wait. I'm sorry. You said that natural selection is something that was practiced on a continent?
No, I'm saying the different way, like here in Africa, your parents or your tribe or your ethnic group would help you choose your mate, right?
Yes.
That was something that was more culturally endowed in West Africa, in Africa. But however, we were stripped of our culture so we didn't practice that when we came over to the United States, and it became
Well,
more.
if I could, well, there is a copious a copious amount of scholarly literature, peer-reviewed literature that substantiates the claim that actually we did retain the culture and practice the culture. I could think of Sterling Stuckey's seminal text, Slave Culture. I could think of John Blassagame's text, The Slave Community, and even, of course, Melville J. Herskowitz's text, The Myth of the Negro Past, and even Michael Gomez's book, Tracing Our Country Mark. So there is a large amount of literature on African cultural retention and African peoples here in the Western world. So I understand the point that you're making, but I think it's also important to understand that even though this was done and there was a systematic effort to strip us of our culture, we were able to retain the culture and practice the culture. A great example for the Dwayne Omawale shared, and you were talking about it in is it Barbuda?
Barbuda, yeah.
In Barbuda, where when the brothers and sisters were emancipated, I don't know if they were self-emancipated or emancipated by the state or the slaveocracy, they went and created their own community, and that community is based on traditional West African cultural values. So we find that even though that is the narrative, I would argue that's part of the master narrative, that we were stripped of our culture, so on and so forth. But we actually find that that was not the case whatsoever. A good example, even in the African American community, is the concept of in the Black church, call and response, shouting, deriving from the ring shout. So there are numerous examples of African cultural retention, not only in African American culture, but the African cultures of African people throughout the Western world.
Yeah, I've heard that before, and one of the ways that they tried or attempted to strip us of our culture is by divide and conquer practices. So the owners of these people that were chattelly enslaved would be sold, so they would have like maybe a woman and a man who made it and started a family, and then they would take and separate the family, sell the offspring, or sell the woman or sell the man, so that those traditional concepts kept getting diluted because of the separation. So they couldn't really build the culture over generations in an organic way. So I think that's an issue. So yeah, there were some things that we were able to hold on to, but to really have it ingrained into our culture, it just got diluted by chattel slavery, and we couldn't really have a true foundation of it. So yeah, there's groups of us like the Gullah Geechee in South Carolina. I believe I might even be part of that.
Yes,
And
so in
then
the Sea Islands, they go from South Carolina, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and of course Florida. Absolutely. And I've actually been to the Sea Islands. So shout out to the Gullah Geechee, right? Absolutely.
And I would think that a lot of those Caribbean countries like Haiti or even Trinidad and Tobago, where chattel slavery wasn't as prominent as it was in the States, where people could hold on to more of their African lineage or their African culture, being that places like Haiti, they still practice like voodoo or Santeria,
yes.
in Puerto Rico and things of that nature. I believe they also practice some voodoo in Trinidad and Tobago as well. So yeah, I believe because there were victims of the chattel slavery, or the intensity of the chattel slavery that we went through in the United States, they were able to hold on to a little bit more of their traditional indigenous African culture. But being that Americans, we were American slaves, or United States of American slaves, I think we were more assimilated into Western culture than they were.
Understood. Yeah, and that is an argument that is made, particularly by one of the critiques of Melville J. Herskowitz's text, is that they find that there was a higher level of African cultural retention in African people in the Caribbean and South America rather than the United States. But even with that being the case, there was a large amount of cultural retention. So very good there. Let me get your questions on this, and you all may have touched base on this while I was away. Trinidad and Tobago, Redraws, the coat of arms. Were you familiar with this, Mr. Sandman? And of course, what are your thoughts on it?
Can you ask me that question one more again?
Yeah, so Trinidad and Tobago, the twin island nation, just north of Venezuela in the Caribbean Sea, they have redrawn their coat of arms to remove Christopher Columbus ships. The question is this a move towards Pan-Africanism, and what are your thoughts on that, on the decision to remove Christopher Columbus's ships from the coat of arms? And many people who may not be aware, Christopher Columbus traveled to Trinidad and Tobago in 1498.
Yeah, we touched on that, or I touched on that with the other panelists is briefly while you were gone.
Okay.
Yeah, so from my understanding, um, Columbus, or the practice of celebrating the Columbus Day here in the Americas, the New World, is something that has been traditionally rejected by the Native Americans in this country, in this land. So when you say that you're rejecting the Columbus and his genocide of the Native Americans here in the in the Americas, it seems like it might be something that's more relevant to the native Tainos that might be present in Trinidad and Tobago, as opposed to its affiliation with Africans. So because Columbus came to the New World before the British brought us over here in the States. I mean, to the Americas. So I don't know the association between the Columbus being removed and African American or Africans in the Caribbean removing the coat of arms from it. It seems like it's more of a gesture for the native indigenous people. However, in regards to the psychology behind it, yeah, it could be Africans attempting to gain more sovereignty. However, when we got into a discussion about it, we were talking about how the economic infrastructure and reparations that we might be entitled to be because we were in slavery. If you want to get that from the Western powers, that don't necessarily be the greatest thing for us, because if we economic system is based on whoever decides the value of our currency to be. And if we're going to get reparations from the Western powers, they the ones who control that currency and decide how much it's worth. We have no control of it. So if they pay us in reparations in their currency, what value does that truly bring to us? So we would have to build our own currency internally first to have true control of ourselves. And if you want to ask for reparations, then you would have to have, if you want sovereignty from being controlled by the international dollar, which happens to be either I believe the American dollar or the French dollar currency or the euro. I think that the only way that you can gain that sovereignty is to have the will and the strength to build your own economic infrastructure internally, which would mean that you would have to build your own technology and your own goods and trade it amongst yourselves, right? And build up your currency internally first.
Absolutely. And just very quickly, want to provide a brief Lumumba Speaks Lumumba Library moment, right? Actually have Dr. John Henry Clarke's book here, Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, Slavery and the Rise of European Colonialism, right? And so one of the issues that Dr. John Henry Clarke talks about in the text is, of course, why this is an issue of significance today is we don't want to maintain edifices to white hegemony, right? So Dr. Clarke talks about on page 17 that U.S. imperialists love Columbus. They have named cities, counties, towns, rivers, colleges, parks, streets, and even their capital after him. Right, I'm living in a city named after Christopher Columbus, right? And now they are organizing a global celebration. And yet to the people, the facts are plain. Columbus was a thief, an invader, an organizer of sexual assault of Indian women, a slave trader, a reactionary religious fanatic, and a personal director of a campaign for mass murder of defenseless peoples.
Yeah, I can understand that. And when I look back at it, like Christopher Columbus, he was Italian, right? and Americos Vespucius, he was also an
Vespucci,
Italian.
yes.
The person who the Americas was named after, he was also an Italian as well.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, so it appears to me that the superpower that the Americans have become is just it's kind of like an extension of the Roman Empire. Yeah, yeah. Because you recall, like, the Romans had control of all of Europe, and Britain, used to be a Roman colony, or controlled by the Romans. So they're naming it after Columbus because basically the Roman Empire still lives on. It's just rebranded itself.
Brother Jabril, I think you want to tap in.
Yeah, no, it just tells you about the psychology of Caucasian people globally, right? The people and the empires they look up to, Columbus, when I said people, Columbus being one of them, right? George Washington, right? They look up to the most evil of evil, right?
I thought George Washington never told a lie. I mean, hold on. I mean, that's what I was taught in school. You're not one of those black identity extremists, are you?
Yeah, I am one of those. But anyway, he might have not told lies to Europeans, but he definitely lied to the Africans he enslaved, right? Yeah, just going back to the psychology of these people, right? When you talk about Europeans, just look at their culture, right? Culture comes from a group of people's psychology, right? And culture, where does white supremacy come from? White supremacy comes from European culture. So that goes to my other point to brothers and sisters that say the issue is the system, right? They say the issue is white supremacy, or they say capitalism. To me, that's foolish. That's not the issue. That's like saying, just like Nana Khaled used to say, that's like saying the issue is the spider web and not the spider. You take down capitalism, you take down the concept of white supremacy, you even give them amnesia of just those two things. Guess what? Another system will come back up that's just as bad, or if not worse, that's going to take over that system. It's their nature. That's where culture comes from. That's where ideologies come from, is from a group's culture, right? So that's just going back to that point of how they bring up Christopher Columbus and how he's a hero to them. Their biggest heroes are their genociders. It's just that simple.
Yes. Very good. Brother Dwayne, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. And what I would add is I always make the point that if you really want to understand why Europeans did what they did to African people, study European history and see what Europeans were doing to each other. And you just, brother Mr. Sandman was talking about the Roman Empire. You read about the Roman Empire and just how brutal and vicious and violent the Roman Empire was, and then think about the fact that the majority of the people who were being oppressed by the Roman Empire were actually other white people, other Europeans, and the Roman Empire came up with some very brutal, sadistic, inhuman ways to not only to torture people, but also think about the fact that a lot of this was done publicly as a form of entertainment. The Colosseum, when we think about what's happening in the Colosseum and the type of violence and the things that happened in the Colosseum that were done for entertainment, or even crucifixion. I always make the point that we associate crucifixion with being a very religious, connected to Christianity, but the fact is that actually was a method which the Roman Empire used to brutally torture people to death, and it was done publicly. They would actually leave the people hanging there crucified to send a very public message to enemies of the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire was a very brutal state, and the Roman Empire really forms the basis for a lot of the powerful Western states that have come after the Roman Empire, but whether we talk about the Spanish Empire, the Portuguese, British, French, or even the United States. So that's just the reality, and that's why I always make the point that African people need to study European history to find out what it was that Europeans were doing to each other before they were even colonizing and enslaving our ancestors.
Absolutely. Hakir Ahmad-Aboudi talks about that as well. So Pro Woman, hope you could tap in, be part of the conversation, says, well, some Roman emperor is black. I've actually come across some information that's at least suggested that was the case, but you can make the same argument that you have black people who have been president of the United States, but they still have a anti-African, imperialistic, military-centered, jingoistic foreign policy. And so I would look at not just the racial identity of the person in power, but the ideology of the person in power as well. A great example with that we even find in education, that many black people in positions at prominent universities and colleges around the country have a very repressive demeanor towards their own people. So I think we have to go beyond just the race of the person, right? But also look at the ideology, right? So very quickly, I want to share, because, but Brother Jabril actually brought up the great ancestor Khalid Muhammad, and so I wanted to play a clip where he's kind of talking about this very issue, right? So very quickly, family, and just very quickly, we're talking about the Phil Donahue show. Many of you may be unaware, but the Phil Donahue show, Phil Donahue actually is from Ohio. He's from Cleveland, but the Phil Donahue show began, guess what? Guess, Dayton, Ohio, 937 Gem City. So definitely want to give a shout out to DYT, Dayton, Ohio, once again. But we're going to play this clip. Fair use, family, fair use, fair use. Okay, give me 1 second. Fair use.
A Jamaican black male who shot 6 people on the Long Island train. Mr. Muhammad speaks.
Where they set black inmates up in these jails and penitentiaries, and in particular there in Nassau County, and pulled all the black officers out and the black inmates so they could jump on Brother Colin Ferguson, because they were mad with him for catching the Long Island train and killing all them white folks. I love Colin Ferguson. I have no official position, so I can say I love him.
You love a man who randomly killed 6 people on a commuter train?
I love Colin Ferguson just as much as the masses of white Americans love General Schwarzkopf, General Westmoreland, General Patton, General MacArthur, and Eisenhower. America awards her killers, and they get ribbons and stripes and bars. I'm sensitive to the pain and suffering of the loss of life on that train, but I'm one of the rebellious slaves. And so when black people stand up out of pain and suffering and frustration, I understand after 500 years.
So yeah, Bible Khalid, Nana Khalid was, I think he was on point there, right? That America rewards, killers and genocidal maniacs, right? Religious, reactionary religious fanatics. And so I think that's something that we need to be cognizant of, particularly in terms of, making sure that we don't teach our children to idolize and want to emulate these individuals as well. As a matter of fact, I recall Dr. Jawanza Kunjuf, we talked about what is the underlying method of Spider-Man and Superman and Batman and all these different superheroes. He said it's very simple. White people wanting to take over the world. Right. So, and just very quickly, the individuals who created Superman are from Cleveland, Ohio. So once again, that's another Ohio connection. Just want to make people aware that if everyone that is someone is either from Ohio as a connection to Ohio. So definitely want to make people aware of that. So at OHIO, we took care of our business, the number 2 team in the country right now. We blew out Akron 52-6, and we're coming for that natty this year. So just want to let you all know we're coming for the natty. You heard it here first. September 1st, 2024, the Ohio State University, that's the key word, the Ohio State University will win the national championship. We could put money on it. Okay, I'm sorry. We're back.
Just as I'm laughing now, when I'm watching the replay, this is how I laugh every time. It's hilarious. He goes into these Ohioisms.
And that's a great point, Ohioism. Most people don't know, but it's the greatest state in the union. If we could say that the union is something worth, actually advocating for, but Ohioism, absolutely, and I always tell people I had the tattoo, so I'm okay. Can you all see? Oh man, I can't even show it. Okay, I'm Lifetime. I got the block O. I'm Lifetime. So
yeah, we dark skin. It's kind of hard to see.
You know what I mean? I got the block O. I'm Lifetime, and so we're gonna hold it down. In Georgia, we're coming for you. Georgia, we're coming. We're coming. We're coming. I'm just gonna let y'all know that right now. We're coming. Right? Okay. So we're back, family. I'm sorry for the brief college football pivot, but hey, we're in the season, and so every now and then you got to make sure your thing is thinging, and so we're going to make sure that our football is footballing this season. When we go undefeated, we're going to beat the team up north. We're going to smack around Oregon in Eugene. Right, we're going to go to their house and let them know who's boss. Right, say we run this we run this mother. You know what I mean? Then we're going to go to Happy Valley, take care of Penn State. Then we're going to end the season November 30th by finally doing what we should have done the past 3 years, and that is we're going to whoop the team up north's candy ass. So with that being said, we're going to get ready to close out, family. Definitely appreciate everyone who tapped in and was part of the conversation. Once again, if you're watching, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button, as well as the notification bell. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. You're watching a dual broadcast between, of course, LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black Empowerment Initiative, where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black, and Bequaline Network, the Pan-African social media extraordinaire, and the home of African-centered news and information. Marcel Joyner, I see you backstage. If you can simply cam up and queue, just want to make sure you're not trolling, then we will bring you into the live. Once again, if you could simply cam up and queue, just want to make sure you're not trolling, then we'll bring you into the live. And then, of course, we just want to make sure that we're squaring away this conversation before we end. So once again, Sister Joyner, want you to tap in. We need some feminine energy here. So we definitely want you to tap in. Okay, your camera isn't working. Okay, very good. So I'm going to bring you in. What say you? Happy you could be here, be part of the conversation.
Welcome, sister.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Okay, I'll be brief.
No, you don't have to be brief. You can take all the time you want.
Well, I know you're gonna end it, and
yeah, I was going to end it because we didn't have any new flavor in the room. But now we got the flavor in your ear. We could keep going. You know what I mean?
All right. Well, I know life be life, and then you got your dissertation coming up.
Well, yeah, absolutely. See, look at you. See, Lumumba's Lumumbaing right now, okay? And we're going to defend that dissertation on September 16th, man. We're going to broadcast it for the world to see.
Yeah, but I'm going to be there. So you hear somebody yelling from afar, acting a fool, that's going to be me cheering you
Absolutely.
on.
And family, just want to let you know my dissertation is 240 pages. I say, once again, it is 240 pages. Let's get it.
I cannot wait to see what you're going to bring to the world, what your scholarship is going to bring to the world. And I also cannot wait to see what the world is going to do with you, Lumumba. Because I just want to see how you're going to fit. When I look at prominent PhDs and intellectuals, I'm thinking of somebody like Mark Lamont Hill, Michael Eric Dyson, Cornel West.
Respectfully, I would say this. They are prominent, but their politics gives me pause.
Yeah.
I would say that. I would say this. If I was a prominent intellectual, public intellectual, my politics would be demonstratively different from the individuals that you name.
And that's why I said I'm going to be really interested to see what the world does with you as you get your book out there. Maybe you get some press and seek to get your voice out there. What will they do with you? Because one thing I found is when Black people are becoming prominent, they're asked certain questions to kind of see where they stand,
mm-hmm.
and it's decided whether or not they'll be promoted based on that.
Right. Well, I would say this. I wouldn't be where I'm at without my community. And I even shared this with Brother Jabril Africa and Brother Dwayne Omawale, that I've given them a shout out in my acknowledgments in my dissertation. So I know, like most boxers would say when they win the fight and they say, well, I got to give a shout out to my team, right? So it's my team that's got me this far. So I can tell you this much, irrespective of how far I go in life, I will not forsake my community. And I will not forsake the ideology that was the impetus for getting me where I've gone. And that, of course, is Pan-Africanism. So there's no way, shape, and form that I would ever be someone who would sell out my own people.
Okay, so it'll be interesting. Will they bring you on to be the contrast to the Eric Dysons and the Mark Lamont Hills, or so? That's why I said it's going to be interesting to see what you do and give to the world, and also what the world does with you.
This is true, but I think another aspect, most PhDs, particularly those who work in higher education or seek to have a career in the academy, aren't public intellectuals. So this is very quickly, this is a brief segue, then we can get back to the conversation that we're having this afternoon, is when you're publishing as an academic, you're not writing for the masses. Typically, you're writing to other academics.
Yes.
So, most academics don't become public intellectuals, right? Cornel West and Brother Dwayne Omawale, of course, he was my brain trust on this shit with me, that Cornel West became, and of course, what's the other guy at Harvard?
Henry Louis
Gates. They became prominent Black public intellectuals because they were attacking scholars and PhDs who were African-centered. right? Michael Eric Dyson, and I have several of Michael Eric Dyson's books. He was one of my inspirations in terms of developing a robust vocabulary, becoming a good writer, so on and so forth, right? I became aware of Michael Eric Dyson when I was still in community college. But Michael Eric Dyson, he's known for his gift to gab, right? I mean, he has a beautiful vocabulary, but he says a lot without saying anything at all.
Yes.
Right, so I mean, of course, we could bring this black guy on and say this is the black guy, but he's going to say a lot and he ain't said a goddamn thing. Right, so we talk about Mark Lamont Hill, right? And Mark Lamont Hill, I think he does some good things. He says some good things, but this is the man who stated that a man can give birth to a child.
Yes.
So, right, this is the man who blames black people typically for any and black men for any and everything. So we see that he's on brand in terms of advocating for certain communities, right? And so oftentimes I would argue most black people are either socialized. I always make the argument black people are socialized and educated to be integrationalists. And then I think a lot of our people, unfortunately, they do not have the imani, the faith to believe in African agency.
Yep, I agree. I'm pro-woman in the chat. By the way, I don't know why my title didn't come up as me.
It is quite all right. I hope that's pro-black women.
Oh, actually, let me explain about that username.
All right now, you know what I'm saying? You gonna come in, we gonna give you a little smoke a little bit. I'm messing with you. Go right ahead.
I come on with that username. People like, oh God, there she go with that white feminism stuff. No, actually, that's just a clever play on words for a lot of things that describe me. Proactive, professional, prolific.
Okay, look at you.
So that's just a clever play on words. It's not any kind of a white-leaning feminine label that I've given to myself. And we can talk about feminism and black. That's a whole nother thing.
You know what? I'm going to do a show on it. We're going to do a show next Sunday on black feminism versus Africana womanism, just for you, pro-woman. How about that? Because you're prolific, you're professional. Okay, so we're going to do a show next week on Africana womanism and black feminist thought.
Okay, yep, that will be good and very much needed because it's become a buzzword. Whenever you go to say you're concerned about black women's issues or anything like that, then you're automatically like, oh, she's on a white feminist kick.
Well, I will say this, if I could cut you off very briefly. I tend to do that a lot on my show. I've had people call me like, why are you always cutting people off? I said, look, I've been doing this since I was a child. My kids do it to me. It's just a Lumumba thing. Charges to my head, not my heart, right? But, you know, Sister Dr. Clenora Hudson Weems argues in her book, Africana Womanism, that black feminism is a derivative of white feminism and is rooted in black women being intellectually lazy. And I can say, I mean, I read the book 3 times, so like, this is what she says.
I haven't. I think I'm familiar with who that is. I have not read that work. She can certainly have that opinion. I do not think though that whenever a black woman, Amy Garvey, she was in media. She was described as a black feminist. So,
this is true. Yes.
So I don't think that anytime a black woman espouses a particular interest or concern about black women's issues contained therein larger black issues that face black and African people, that she can automatically be dismissed as being anti-man, anti-black, and in alignment with white feminist thinking. So I think that there's some nuance there that maybe the sister can incorporate into her.
Well, and yeah, she addresses the nuance. And LMA, brother LMA, hopefully you could tap in. I know you oftentimes are a contributor to the show, so hopefully you could tap in as well. Appreciate your comment. You said you were just making a criticism of Mark Lamont Hill the other day. So one of the arguments that she makes is the fact that from an African womanist frame of reference, they argue that we need African solutions for African problems, right? And that in traditional African culture, we know that men and women worked in tandem with each other, right? In community with each other, in collaboration with each other. But from a black feminist standpoint, and of course, overarching feminism in general, the relationship between men and women is viewed as antagonistic, and men are viewed as oppressors of women. So that's the concept. That's what she talks about in this concept of it being, of course, intellectually lazy and a derivative of white feminism. And I can say that because I actually have I've had the book Black Feminist Thought behind me. So I have read it and I've even cited it in my dissertation.
And I think I've heard that sister speak, and I've heard people speak on that point of view quite often. And again, I would say that there has to be nuance. For example, if you look at certain issues happening on the African continent today, within the Black community today, and you take a look at femicide or violence against women.
Yes.
And if you have a concern about those kinds of things, that does not mean that you are anti.
I would agree. I would agree.
White feminism. So there has to be a space to talk about those kinds of issues within the larger context of our struggle. Let me get back to the couple. I want to say a couple things real quick about the things I put in the chat. I was on the discussion a few weeks ago about the Nation of Islam.
Yes, you were.
And you had said, I stuck my head in briefly on the other conversation, the follow-up that you all did. And, you had mentioned that I had said that Riza Islam was a scholar.
Yes, I remember that. Yes. I think that was part one. And we're going to have part 3 this coming Wednesday evening, where we're going to wrap up our 3-part series on the Nation of Islam, called for a community. Make sure you all tap in this coming Wednesday, September 4th.
Yeah, I'll try to stick my head in because I have a few things I'd like to contribute that I think will be worthwhile. But let me just say this about scholarship. I misspoke if I said that Riza Islam was a scholar. I must have misspoke, and the mic sometimes isn't that good on this computer. So I would not consider Riza Islam to be a scholar. However, I would challenge you to be willing to lend the term scholarship to the collection of information that is fact-based, that is logical, that we come up with, that describes and deconstructs our oppression and our oppressors. Be willing to possibly lend the term scholarship to that, because that kind of scholarship is not going to be codified in mainstream institutions.
Well, I would say this, I always have. In fact, I was just citing the work of Dr. John Henry Clark in his book, Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust.
Okay.
Right? When we did our show on the Nation of Islam, and I provided an African-centered critique of Islam, I was citing Dr. Malefique Asante's book, Afrocentricity, that was written in 1980. So my definition of scholarship, which I would argue is the definition of scholarship, has always incorporated African-centered frames of reference. What I don't incorporate is individuals who engage in subterfuge and make apocryphal statements that are unable to be substantiated.
Oh, yeah. See, there's a lot of pseudo scholarship out here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the aspects of pseudo scholarship is scholarship that typically is not peer reviewed, or is scholarship that when people do self-publish, there are very little citations. Right. And matter of fact, and I could just say this from someone who's gone through a doctoral program, which is scholarship based. One of the first things that we're taught to do when someone writes an article of any kind is to look at their references, look at their bibliography. Where are they getting their information? Right. And I can say this as someone who is a scholar. I have a actual platform on Google Scholar. I get text messages all the time when someone has actually cited my work. I got a message maybe about 2 months ago where a number of people cited some of my publications in their dissertation. And I told my doctoral advisor, I said, man, I guess I really do know what I'm talking about. He said, yeah, that's why you're in the program, right? You do know what you're talking about, right? So that is something that matters. But unfortunately, what happens is, most people aren't college educated, right? Most people, don't actually go very far in terms of formal education. So you have individuals that are able to come around and make it seem like they're scholars and provide information that, of course, once again, is ahistorical and apocryphal. And so that's why I made that claim about Riza Islam. When I did the first show on the Nation of Islam, someone told me to reach out to Wesley Muhammad. I did reach out to Wesley Muhammad. I sent him a message on Instagram. I went to his website and sent a message asking him to come on and be part of the conversation. It didn't happen. When I reached out to one of my powerful brothers, he said it more than likely won't happen because they aren't willing to engage in a conversation with someone who is their intellectual equal. right? They want to engage in conversations where they could talk about issues that people typically aren't knowledgeable of. So it makes it seem like they have insight to information that no one else actually has.
And I think that's interesting because it seems like I'm defending the nation all the time, where I actually have I take some of the same issues that you guys do with them. But for example, the Nation of Islam has a research department, and they produce things like the secret relationship between the history of Blacks and Jews and so on and so forth. Now, this kind of research probably won't be peer reviewed. However, what it does do is point to irrefutable facts. For example, something like Levitt towns that were Jewish owned, having covenants in their leases that they wouldn't sell to Black people, so on and so forth.
But so, if I could, but that's not anything new. I mean, people already knew that. For example, when they talk about Jewish involvement, particularly in terms of financing the slave trade, I learned that at Wright State University when I took a class on the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, that's nothing new. All you gotta do is take a damn class and you will learn that information.
A lot of people didn't know.
But you have to understand, most people don't actually go to college and take a class on the history of the transatlantic slave trade.
But some people, but even if you go to college and take a class on the history of the transatlantic slave trade, you may not get some information and analysis that you might get from the Nation of Islam's research department.
You know, actually, I would disagree. The reason why I say that is because I have a bachelor's and a master's in Africana studies. And so you would get that information. And now one of the claims that the Nation of Islam made is that they were the primary force. Jewish people were the primary force behind the transatlantic slave trade. And that is something that was just not true. That is ahistorical.
But would you, Brother Lumumba, would you say that course that you took, right, in Africana studies goes over the entire history of the transatlantic slave trade?
Yeah, it did.
Like every nuance aspect of it,
the professor that taught the course was the director of the program, and his PhD was in African history.
But see, here's the thing, if I can just jump in real quick, Lumumba, and this is where we may agree to disagree, that there are certain things that you're not going to get in your master's degree, your PhD, whatever, going through traditional school, even if it's an HBCU. They're not going to teach you how to overthrow them, brother. That's one thing Steve Coakley used to say. Have you ever seen a teacher teaching against the name of the building?
Actually, I would say one of the reasons why Black Studies struggles to actually, the Black Studies departments and programs struggle to even exist on college campuses is because the very nature of those programs are what? Anti the institution. So what? And I get what you're saying, but the claims you're making, you wouldn't make those claims if you actually took courses or majored in Black Studies. You would know that the claim, what you're saying isn't true.
Courses in Black Studies.
You did.
Let me just say this real quick. The reason why I'm here today, see, Black people need two kinds of educations. We need a technical education that you can get going through school, getting your PhD, your master's degree, and then I would argue that we need an independent-based socioeconomic education, more like what you would get when you were teaching the course that you said you taught on Saturday mornings.
Yes.
I've had those kinds of courses, and that is the reason why I'm here more than my college education, which I have. I'm actually going to go on and become an attorney.
Okay, look at you.
I argue that it is that when people come up with those independent kinds of lines of thinking and analysis, there are a lot of people out here today who are pseudo people, old school were not. They can in fact be considered scholars, because some of our most revolutionary scholars, brother, are not going to come through a university system.
I understand that. J.A. Rogers would be a good example of that.
Thought and thinking, revolutionary thinking, is not going to be peer reviewed. So
wait. But so you're conflating revolutionary thinking with scholarship, right? And when we talk about scholarship is peer reviewed. Now, that doesn't mean that someone
European Western canon.
This is a good point. I'm glad you brought this up. That's not just a Western concept, right? When we talk about studying African examples of higher education, particularly the University of Sankore in Timbuktu, West Africa, right? that was the standard there as well. Right, so this isn't just a European Western canon concept of scholarship. Right, even then, when individuals graduate, in fact, you had to get 5 degrees, if I remember correctly, rather than just 1. When you're writing in higher education and you're going to write a thesis, you're going to write a dissertation, you have to show that you know the history, that you are familiar with the scholarly literature on whatever subject matter that you're writing about, and then you have to interject, right, what in your literature or your argument fills a gap in the literature. That's the case globally. That's not just a Western concept. Now that doesn't mean that you can write things that are beneficial to African people. A great example, even though I critique the Nation of Islam, they have a great newspaper. Shit, go figure. They have a great newspaper that addresses issues across the Black world, right? But scholarship is different from someone writing revolutionary literature, right? Those are 2 different things. Scholarship is peer reviewed. Scholarship makes sure that you can't make claims that are ahistorical. Scholarship is reviewed by people who are the preeminent scholars and researchers in the field that you're writing about. So we have to make sure that we're not conflating the difference between revolutionary literature, which is important, and I have a lot behind me, and of course, scholarship.
Okay, so I'm saying, and I put a link in the chat for a book on decolonizing research methods by Native American sister Linda Tiswali Smith, and you can take a quick glance.
Yeah, I am familiar with decolonizing research methods. I actually read some literature on that when I even helped facilitate a podcast, a live stream at Ohio State, where we actually had a person come on and discuss how you're able to engage in decolonial type methods when you're engaging in qualitative literature to ensure that you're not producing harm when you are engaging in research. Because we know historically, scholarship and particularly qualitative research, particularly in the field of anthropology, was rooted in, of course, gaining information about indigenous peoples so that you could do harm to them.
Exactly. Scientific racism, quite a bit of scientific racism. In fact, you can't pathologize white people in academia.
Well, actually, I would disagree. There's a lot of literature out on whiteness studies where white people are being pathologized. There's even a growing group of white scholars that refuse to even identify themselves as white because they view whiteness and white culture as inherently parasitic in nature.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I actually have some of the books behind me. Matter of fact, I'm trying to see if I can. I don't think I'm gonna be able to find it right off the bat, but yeah, you actually can, because it's been done. Matter of fact, I got a couple books on Robin DiAngelo, her book White Fragility. There's another book by White Rage by Carol Anderson. So there's a lot of literature in academia that does pathologize white people.
Maybe not to the extent of, say, something like Frances Cress Welsing's Cress theory, and I don't know how you feel about Frances Cress Welsing or her Cress's theory of color confrontation and racism.
I have the utmost respect for our great ancestor, Queen Mother Frances Cress Welsing.
Okay, so she got fired from a job at Howard. I don't think Cress's theory. Did you cite any of that, or are you aware of it being cited?
I'm aware of it being cited. I didn't cite it in my dissertation, but part of it's because my dissertation didn't focus on that. But I have cited her work in other papers that I've written.
Okay. Yeah, because my understanding is that she, not only her, but Malife Asante ran into a lot of problems within the academy. And I don't know, maybe you can, you or Dwayne, people can help me today about where is the standing in the academy today on about Egyptians being Black. I know we're getting a lot of pushback from the Egyptian government today when prominent Egyptian historical figures are portrayed as Black, like Cleopatra. I know.
Right. Well, there are a couple of reasons for that, but very quickly, one of the issues, the primary reason why Malife Asante had issues in the academy was because there were accusations of plagiarism. He was pumping out about a book every year, And that is just that. I mean, that's just unknown, unheard of to be able to be that prolific in one's writing. Particularly, I mean, it's one thing to produce articles, right? And papers, but he was writing books. And so the argument that was made, and there were a number of graduate students that said that he was taking many of the ideas that they had in their, of course, papers, and then using those ideas to write his books. So that was where, and so as a result, he had to step down as the department chair of Africana Studies at Temple University, and then he later was able to regain that department chair position. But that was the issue regarding why he had issues in the academy. There were accusations of plagiarism.
No, actually, in fact, he was on Phil Donahue's show maybe back in the 80s, where he was making the claim that ancient Egyptians were Black, and that a lot of achievements of Egypt can be credited to the Black people of Egypt. And I remember him being on Phil Donahue specifically. So that's the kind of problem that I'm asking.
No, and the reason why that wouldn't be an issue is because one of the goals in higher education is to bring forth new theories and concepts that challenge existing beliefs. For example, him going on national media actually would provide a lot of prestige, not only for the university, but also for the program, right? But in higher education, it all comes down to what? Particularly if you are at a tier 1 institution that focuses on publications, it's going to come down to publish or perish. And you have to make sure that you're publishing in top tier journals, right? And once you gain tenure, you can literally say whatever the hell you want, as long as you have an intellectual basis for backing it up. And I can say this because I'm in the academy. So once again, the issue that he had was based on there were several accusations of plagiarism, where he was taking graduate students' works, taking their concepts and ideas, and then writing books based off what they wrote in his classes.
Yes, and I'm aware of the issue that he had with plagiarism. I'm also aware of the issue that he had when he was making the assertion that the Egyptians were Black, and a lot of achievements that were credited to Egypt can be credited to Black Egyptians. I remember him saying these things out of his mouth when I saw him in the 90s at the Center for Inner City Studies. So that's all I'm trying to get to the point. I want to get off this because we can go all day with this.
But all I'm saying is, he had tenure. There's no way that he's going to have issues in terms of job security when he has tenure, making those type of claims. And he wouldn't be the first person that made those claims, and he wasn't the last. Matter of fact, Mark Bernal, he wrote a book, Black Athena, right? And of course, it was a big issue in the academy. They had conferences about his book, Black Athena. But, like I said, this is nothing new, but that wouldn't cause a person, and like I said, I'm in the academy, that wouldn't cause a person to lose their job. That would not threaten a person's job security, particularly when you have tenure. That doesn't happen that way.
So what was happening when ideas come along within the academy that challenge conventional wisdom and authority, especially white supremacy, civilization and culture, and white Western hegemony, what happens with those ideas? Because the academy is very, very snooty, and that's what I'm maybe warning you against a little bit, Bakari Lumumba.
I'm aware of that.
Sorry, right?
I mean, a good example would be the African American Studies program at Harvard University, in which they promote integrationism, and everyone in the African American Studies program that I know of are integrationists and are in relationships with white people, even if they're heterosexual or homosexual.
And do you think that will affect their scholarship?
Of course it affects their scholarship.
Absolutely. So that's all I'm saying.
So, I mean, it also depends on what university you go to, right? So these are things you have to be aware of, but Malefica Asante, once again, created the program at Temple. Matter of fact, Temple University is the first institution in America to actually have a PhD program in Africology. So, like I said, this dude created the whole doctoral program. Ain't no way he's gonna have a problem because he goes on a TV show and says the ancient Egyptians were Black. He wasn't even the first person to even make that argument. But so, like I said, that's not the reason why he had the issues that he was having. The issue was based on there was accusations of plagiarism, and plagiarism in the academy is a cardinal sin. It literally is. That's just the reality.
Unless Europeans do it and claim it as their own, but somebody else do it, and then it can be a problem. But if Europeans do it, claim knowledge.
I've seen situations where white people have engaged in plagiarism, and they actually went before the committee of academic misconduct and was kicked out the program, or they actually had to lost their job and had to find a job at another institution. I've seen it happen.
Yeah, well, that's real selective because
No, it's not selective. It's not selective. I work in the academy. If a person is accused of plagiarism, that professor is going to send that document to the Committee of Academic Misconduct, and there's going to be a hearing. It's not selective. I'm speaking from experience. I used to work in academic misconduct, for crying out loud, for 2 years. It's not selective.
Bruh, look at all the knowledge that Europeans claim that they invented science, they invented mathematics, they invented everything that in European thought.
So once again, you're speaking of hold on. If you go to college or a university and you take a class on a history course, a science course, a math course, they don't teach that in higher ed. They actually teach you the truth. For example, I remember being in a Western civilization course, right? And the professor was a white man, and he said Columbus did not discover America. He was lost. Native Americans were already there, right? And he had us read Howard Zinn's book, The People's History of the United States of America from 1492 to the present. So the claims you're making, sister, from someone who has worked in the academy since 2012 are false.
From someone who is in the academy as a student right now, as someone who just got out of a course on socio-political philosophy where the white woman was saying things like, if we don't give aid to Africa, African children will starve.
And was this a student or a professor?
This was a professor.
Okay.
As a student right now in the academy, going through school, I have to hear all of these things. Now,
and did you provide a rebuttal to the claim that she made?
Let me finish real quick, because I've had another education. I'm in a position to rebut and refute those claims, and they don't quite land the same way. I'm very selective about when I speak up and offer a correction or an addendum versus when I don't, because I don't want to get, kicked out and stuff. But anyway, but so when you take a class on philosophy, for example, you start in Europe. We didn't read any.
Well, I can say I took humanities courses at a PWI. I took a philosophy course at a PWI, and we actually began. The professor was a white guy, and we began in Africa.
That's not been my experience, and I think.
I'm not saying this to just provide a retort. Like literally, the textbook I remember the class was called "Search for Utopia." The entire first month of the semester, of course, it was three months in the semester. We focused on Kemet.
So, what did you say? Did you learn that the people that you were focusing on and reading about were Black or African people?
Well, we didn't discuss their racial identity. But what we did do, what we did focus on was that, of course, ancient Kemet were the progenitors of Western civilization, and that many of the core concepts that we find in even Abrahamic Western religions, known as Abrahamic religions, derive from ancient Kemet.
Well, that is not the norm. That's an outlier experience. Anybody go on Amazon right now. Sorry about that siren. I live next to a fire station. Go on Amazon right now. Google a book on Western civilization and see, does it not start in Greece? Overwhelmingly, it will start in Greece. That is racism right there. That's all.
I would agree with that.
We can agree to disagree, but let me just say this. When you say that you're going to run into problems with Black people, Bakari, Black people like me, and a lot of, I would argue, the radicalized Black masses.
What do you mean, Black people like you?
Black people like me who say that scholarship doesn't have to be peer reviewed. That when we come up with an analysis of the enemy, of his tactics and strategies, and what he has done, when we educate ourselves about things that are not widely known, they might be true, just not widely known. When we challenge conventional wisdom and authority, and we haven't been codified or approved of by mainstream institutions, that those people can be considered just as smart, and in fact, sometimes smarter. One thing Umar Johnson said is, stop putting people with college degrees as the head of your movement. Now, I know you guys are critical Umar, and there's a lot to be said about Umar, but there's something to be said about about sometimes people, educated people, being well-educated fools. And I just bring up the fact that Black people are still in our subjugated position that we are in today, despite having thousands of millions of skilled and educated people. And why is that? Because they are not trained to produce sovereignty and revolution. Even at an HBCU, HBCUs are not nation-building universities.
I understand that, but you also have to understand that most people go to college to be able to gain an education and have a career. Right? That's just the reality. So I think we have to look at the nature of what a college is actually intended for. The second issue is I would push back against Umar Johnson. We find this amongst a lot of people who are so-called in the conscious community, where they promote this level of anti-intellectualism. And the reason why isn't because people who are educated are somehow kind of counter-revolutionary. The issue is because they don't want people who will be able to provide intellectual analysis or critique of the apocryphal claims and decisions and detrimental decisions that they're actually making. That's the real issue behind that, and we find that throughout the African world, right? So I think those are issues that we need to understand. I would even make the argument that in my dissertation, I challenged the prevailing thought regarding a number of issues in the academy, right? And once again, my dissertation is peer reviewed, right? So I think you're making some claims that are a bit grandiose, but have holes in them, right? I can understand that in your personal experience that you've experienced racism, anti-Blackness from university professors. That is something I think almost every Black collegian can state. However, once again, I would die on my heel when I say scholarship should be and must be peer reviewed, because what happens is this is how you get individuals like Wesley Muhammad. This is how you get individuals like Riza Islam, and even individuals like Tariq Nasheed scamming the Black community with pseudo information and misinformation, leading people to think that they're actually learning something that will help them or inspire them to create a better life for African people at home and abroad.
Brother Lumumba,
bias against those individuals. I think
no, it's not a bias. I'm just stating facts.
Put forth is absolutely factual.
Wait, hold on. Such as what?
Oftentimes, peer-reviewed studies.
Wait, hold on. No. You claim that they have put forth information that was factual, such as.
Now, I have to really get into the weeds on Riza Islam's position on vaccinations and so on and so forth. But what he does is he just gives an independent critique of articles, peer review systems. He's done advocacy against vaccination. So
once again, hold on. You stated that he's made claims that were factual. So my question is, what claims did he make that were factual? And then I'm gonna pass it to Jabril and then LMA, because you've been waiting patiently.
Yes, when he says that we don't necessarily need to take vaccinations, that there are ways to get around having to have vaccinations, and a number of other things. Again, I have to really go back and review and get into the weeds on the vaccination issue and look at what he's talked about. But he's giving an analysis and a critique, an independent critique of factual information.
Is Riza Islam a healthcare professional?
That is what
No. I can't let you monologue like a DC villain. I need you to answer my question. Is Riza Islam a healthcare professional?
I'm sorry.
Is Riza Islam a healthcare professional?
Let me just say this.
No. I need you to answer the question. It's a yes or a no.
He does have some college education.
No, ma'am, sister, pro-woman, prolific professional. I need you to answer the question.
Give medical information.
Ma'am, you can't overtalk me on my platform. Sister, you can't overtalk me on my platform. I'm asking a very simple question, and I need a very simple answer. Is Riza Islam a healthcare professional?
You do not have to be a.
No. That's not what I asked you. It's a simple yes or no.
I'm giving you his credentials and
ma'am, sister, is he a healthcare professional?
He has credibility and credentials.
No, ma'am, that's not what I asked you. Once again, you're not answering the question directly. Is he okay? I see. I understand. So, Brother Jabril, go right ahead.
Yeah. A couple questions. Like I've been listening this whole time, and I have like a lot of questions, but I'll just try to center it or keep it to two. So first, Lumumba, would you say that all scholarship needs to be peer reviewed through the university system, if you will, European university system?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be through a European university system.
Okay.
A great example would be Dr. Carter G. Woodson. He created the Journal for the Study of African American Life and History, right?
Okay.
And so that was a journal created by a Black man. And so I've actually submitted articles to that journal, right? And guess what? It's peer reviewed by Black scholars.
I was just gonna ask.
Right. So it doesn't have to be, white people don't have to have nothing to do with it. But if I submit an article and I want it to be published, it needs to be peer reviewed by people who are proficient and preeminent in that discipline.
Yeah.
And that's why I said, matter of fact, the Journal of Black Studies, I believe, was created by Dr. Molefi K. Asante. I'm still trying to make inroads there. Right. So yeah, I mean, white people don't have to have anything to do with it. But if you're going to make a claim, like when I wrote my dissertation, I had to actually show that I knew the history, not only of Black culture centers, but also I had to show that I knew the historiography, of course, the writing of history about Black culture centers. In order to even be part of that conversation, I had to show that I knew what I was talking about.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And like, once again, this is devoid of white folks, because all of the literature on Black culture centers have been written by what? Black people. I got the books right behind me.
And that was my next point. Like, do we have our own, and I'm so solution based, I'm thinking about what's the solutions. So our own institutions that do this. And from hearing from you, we have multiple. So that's good.
Right. Yeah.
The next thing, you talked about European historiography, right? Or historiography. Amos Wilson, in this book, I'm bringing it out because Lumumba will get excited.
You put a big smile on my face.
Classification of African consciousness.
I got it behind me.
By a great ancestor, Amos Wilson, where he talks about these European institutions, these universities, right, are where they essentially cook up these ideas, right? And
we're talking about scientific racism.
Yeah.
Even scientific sexism, yes.
Yep, exactly. My thing is, we shouldn't view these institutions as holy, right? That they can't do no wrong. We understand that they're white supremacist institutions.
And if I could, brother, I'm everything you just said, I discussed in my dissertation.
Okay, and that's what I think what Sister Michelle's trying to get at, and that's why I agreed with quite a few.
But I've never made the claim that these institutions were holy. Like and this is just innocent plug. Chapter 1 and chapter 2 of my dissertation, I go in on higher education, particularly predominantly white institutions, as being not only historically actors of anti-blackness, but oftentimes the progenitors and disseminators of anti-blackness. And I give several examples of this. From the classroom to the treatment of Black people, and in terms of these predominantly white institutions playing a role in gaining the massive, what's it called, these institutions, but they have when they, hold on, give me 1 second, because I want to make sure I get this right. Their endowments all came as a result of them playing a role in gaining money from the transatlantic slave trade. I go through all of this in my dissertation.
Okay.
Right? So once again, when people say, you can't talk about these things. Oh, yes, you can. There's a lot of scholarship on it. Matter of fact, there's a book right here, Craig Stephen Wilder. He's a professor of American history at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is a top 10 institution in the country. His book is Ebony and Ivory, Race, Slavery, and the Troubled History of America's Universities. You have numerous Black scholars at predominantly white institutions who are tenure track, making big money, who their entire research is about anti-Blackness in the academy.
But my point is, maybe you guys just weren't seeing eye to eye. But that's a lot of what the sister was saying. That's why I was not in my head. She was making some valid points, right? And I don't know if it was just like you guys weren't understanding each other, but these are white supremacist institutions, right? Yeah. But my last thing, Lumumba, real quick, do you think that all books you have to send through to get peer reviewed within these institutions, even the Black ones, would you say?
Well, if you are going to be, if your profession is to be a professor, you have to, all your scholarship has to be peer reviewed. If you're a professor, you have to. I mean, it's a job requirement. There's no way around it. Like if you're a professor at a tier 1 institution, if you don't write a book within your first 5 years, you're going to be fired.
Okay.
Now they make it easy where they say all you got to do is take your dissertation and turn that into a book. They make it easy on you. But these are like job requirements. So a lot of people say, well, these professors, they ain't doing The workload a professor has, a tenure track professor has, it's crazy. Like I remember my advisor, this dude was answering emails 5 o'clock in the morning. We meet for a meeting. This dude got bags under his eyes, like he the president, gets no sleep. So there are reasons why, like you have to publish or perish. If you don't publish, you lose your job, like literally. Not figuratively, not theoretically. They will fire your candy ass, irrespective of your race. I've seen it happen. Right.
Exactly.
LMA, brother LMA, you've been waiting patiently. Want to bring you in.
Hey, what's going on, Lumumba? Good afternoon, Check. You guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great discussion. I was looking at it. I forgot one of the guys on the panel said, forgive me, said something along the lines of we have to have a decolonization of the mind before you have something along those lines. You have to decolonize your mind before you start talking about reparations or something like that, because if the mind is not right, whatever movements you make next will eventually fall apart. And I am glad to hear that, Trinidad and Tobago are going to remove the Christopher Columbus ships from their coat of arms, but at the same time, they're still part of the, Commonwealth of England, Now, obviously, it takes time to remove those economic ties.
I thought they're a republic now. I thought they're a republic now. I thought they removed the Queen.
No, they're still part of the Commonwealth. I put that link in the chat. Commonwealth country.
Yeah. If you go to the Commonwealth.org, they're still considered a part of it. Yeah. And
because those are separate. Having the Queen as the head of state and the Commonwealth are two separate things. You could be an independent republic and still be part of the Commonwealth.
Okay. Right. Yeah, because I see here they are officially the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah. And what I was getting at, and I understand, I don't want to just take jabs at people, because I understand that there is a case for what's called incremental, like small steps. Maybe the first step is just to remove, to remove the ships. Eventually, I would like to see, all of these African countries. Even when you go on the website, there's a lot of African countries. There's a lot of Black countries still part of that Commonwealth, and I would love to see them, cut those economic ties, those political ties, and then they can truly be independent. And I'm hoping that there's a strand of kind of pro-Black Pan-African mentality that's what they're working towards. And obviously it's gonna take some time, but go from there. The comment I made, you made a funny comment, talk about Mark Lamont Hill. I don't know if you saw that interview that Nina Turner did. I forgot which broadcast she did it, but he was making a comment about, because Nina Turner said that, I hope I'm not
and real quick, brother, Nina Turner is from where? Ohio. Just once again,
Ohio. Yeah. I have a lot of respect for Nina Turner, but she was having I don't know if you saw the interview. She had an interview with some outlet, and she was basically talking about how the Democratic Party emasculates Black men or whatever, because the topic was, why aren't as many Black men showing up to the polls? And I'm like, okay, well, of the Black men that vote, 80% vote Democrat, so whatever on that point. But then, so funny that Mark Lamont Hill, he had he basically commented on that and reacted to it, and he started bringing up all these topics about Black men this, Black men that, and patriarchy this, and I'm like, I didn't have a problem with Nina Turner with what she said, but I can see why somebody who thinks that women can impregnate men will have a difficulty understanding why Black men will feel emasculated by the Democratic Party. I
think what just to chime in very briefly, that the comments that you're sharing that Mark Lamont Hill said, you said Black man this, Black man that, patriarchy this, patriarchy that. That's very on brand for Mark Lamont Hill.
It very much is.
Very, very much on brand.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's just the reality.
Yeah, but I just thought that was funny. Because like I said, I just made that comment, because I think he had a conversation with Candace Owens, and he was just talking there, and I'm just like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess
because we know about Candace Owens, but then he starts
yeah,
saying stuff that you like, man, this is nonsensical as well. And I would say
Yeah.
this, and this is just kind of to go backwards before we go forward. This is pro woman, Sister Michelle. There is something that I believe in called organic intellectual. And I believe that oftentimes in our community, what we have are organic intellectuals. These are individuals who are scholars, who are academics, and hopefully Brother Dwayne can tap back in. We may have lost him briefly. That you don't have to go to a college or read literature to know what the French social is going on in the community and what's being done to African people at home and abroad. Right? You don't have to do that to develop solutions that are prescriptive and proactive and progressive in nature to solve the issues that we face. So this is something that I've shared with my students almost every week. I would tell them, you all are organic intellectuals. You may not have mastered the academic language used to define these issues, but you know what the French social is going on.
Right. Okay. But Lumumba, even to that point, I would like to say that, even if call it whatever you want to call it, but I think that there definitely needs to be a refining process for ideas. And that's what this peer review is. Like if you come up with an idea, and I've done this before, like I've come up with an idea, popped in my head, and I thought about it, and I would talk to like my brother, or I'll talk to friends, and then they would just come at it from a different angle and then break it down to me. And I'm like, damn, I didn't think about that. And had I acted on those impulses, I would have been in a world of hurt because it was just an angle that I didn't see. So I would say that you want to call it peer review, you call it whatever, but you need to have some process to look over your ideas and make sure that they, jive well with reality. Because if you don't, like you said, you're going to have scammers, people who can just come up here and say anything, and there's just no process to, validate what they're saying. And they can just say whatever, and people gonna go with it.
And that is all. You just want to be able to substantiate. Like when you are a scholar and you take a position, your job is to be able to substantiate the claims that you are making independently. So, and Brother Dwayne and I, we've talked about this, about, there's a difference between, of course, a primary reference and a secondary reference. So if we're talking about hieroglyphics and being able to discern what hieroglyphics actually state, the primary source for that would be the Rosetta Stone, right? A secondary source would be someone writing about the Rosetta Stone. So like these things are important, right? Because if people don't know these things, you can manipulate people. And that's why, like I said, I am a vociferous critic of the American public school system. That's what I call it. I was a victim of it. But I do not believe that we help our people by replacing the school system with a historical education system that does not provide the level of rigor needed and necessary to challenge Black children, African children the world over. I have a huge issue when I go to different events or I'm invited to be part of a weekend program and the rigor is not there. Right? They were, like, well, how are we supposed to be helping the kids and we don't even challenging them intellectually? I would tell my students, I said, there are going to be numerous times in the classroom where you're going to make a claim that I actually agree with 100% wholeheartedly, and I'm still going to push back. I'm still going to play devil's advocate. I'm still going to play, as Brother Jabril likes for me to say, white devil's advocate.
You're playing
because that is how you grow as an intellectual. That's how you grow as a thinker. That's how you grow, period. Is by what? Having some resistance, right? I was at the gym today, hitting shoulders. I'm almost back to where I was pre-injury. Body by Lumumba coming soon, right? But once again, you have to have that pushback. You can't just have sycophants in your coterie. It doesn't work. It doesn't help you.
Exactly. That's why it's called healthy debate.
Yeah. But like I said, Innocent Plug, chapter 1 and 2 of my dissertation, I go in on the history of anti-Blackness in higher education. I'm talking about, I dove so deep, brother, you would thought I was finding Nemo. You know what I'm saying? Like, seriously.
So I would say, again, I like, that's a lot of what I want to do when I'm telling people about maybe how to better evaluate people who are speaking, people with these big platforms, to look at some of their track record, look at who influenced their thinking to get them to where they are at a certain point. They may have wanted to have read a book or two. So I'm just saying, I'm not being anti-intellectual when I say that the only scholarship is peer-reviewed scholarship. I'm just not denying the contribution of even somebody like an Elijah Muhammad. And I'll talk about this on that other show you have when I come on.
Let me ask you this. Have you read Elijah Muhammad's Message to the Black Man?
I read a lot of that stuff. I read like 30 years ago, so I have to go back and reread it.
Hold on. What you mean 30 years ago? You sound like you're 27. Stop it.
No, I'm 57, honey.
You sound like you're 20. You sound like you're 27. You know what I mean? You ain't one of those game over here. You about 26 years old.
Black don't crack. I'm 50.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, so real quick, Mr. Sandman says, Mark Lamont here was playing linguistic semantics. There is a difference between gender and sex. Gender is a cultural construct. Sex is a biological trait. He was being disingenuous. Overstood. So, I mean, I've read Elijah Muhammad's work. I've read his speeches. I cannot call that dude an intellect. I think he was able to take what black people, I mean, this happens a lot. Black people are disenfranchised. Black people are oppressed. You tap into that discontent, and then you utilize that to manipulate people. We find it every day. We find it every Sunday in the Negro church.
You need to be an intellect to be a psychologist?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, because part of being a psychologist or a psychiatrist is your ability to diagnose a problem and prescribe a solution or treatment to the issue. And a great example of that would be Francis Cress Welsing.
Yeah, I agree. And I knew you were going to say that. That's why what I was going to tell you is, Dr. Amos Wilson says Elijah Muhammad is the greatest, one of, if not the greatest psychologist black people have ever produced, right? And I know how much you respect him, and to me, I can't push back on what he was saying, right?
I would have to respectfully
disagree with him. Yeah, I mean,
and I would give you an example. There are times where I respectfully disagree with Malefique Asante. I give you an example.
You don't need to agree with everyone, especially even people who inspired you to. I know Amos Wilson definitely inspired you to be one of your main inspirations for sure. You don't have to agree with the people who inspire you 100% of the time. I don't know if I agree with probably Amos Wilson actually. Other than Amos Wilson, I don't know if I agree with anyone else 100%. Me and my brother Dwayne are literally have formed an organization, and me and him have, as you would coin it, voracious debates, right, from time to time. We still agree on the vast majority of things. It's cool. You can disagree on things, but still move forward in a positive and constructive way.
Mm-hmm.
And can intellectuals be manipulative?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, this is why we tend to find in the so-called conscious community, and LMA, I want you to tap in here, we find individuals who, this is something I've noticed. You have people who have PhDs in the conscious community, right? Conscious community. And then they're disavowed temper, but that don't mean you need to go to education. You don't need to worry about getting a college degree. And I would argue it's because they want to be able to have a level of intellectual one-upsmanship on people who don't. I find that very curious. Well, if education is good for you, then why isn't it good for me? I just find that this is very curious to me.
That's a valid point. And as somebody who was schooled by OG street scholars, somebody like a Steve Coakley, I would say that you're saying that that they don't go to school because they want to be able to get over on people.
No, that's not what I said. I said that what we find is there are individuals who have terminal degrees in the conscious community, particularly individuals like one, and I would name them Umar Johnson and Boyce Watkins, but that disavow people, try to disabuse people of pursuing a post-secondary education.
Oh,
and I said I find that rather curious.
Oh, okay. Yeah, see, the role of education, especially in this technological society, education versus technical skill. I'm one who says, and one of the reasons why I'm so old and finishing up school is because I was radicalized in my 20s and 30s, and I thought education was the white man's thing.
Right, and that's unhealthy.
That's very unhealthy. And so now I understand that actually to have a sovereign nation state, you need to have skills in material existence and how to manipulate it to your benefit. So you need to know something. You need to be educated.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to have a sovereign nation state and you have people, you have to have a legislature. The legislature consists of people who are lawyers.
Yep, you got a lawyer, you got to people fix the pipe. So you have to have people with
Right.
a number of
Absolutely, you have to have actual technical skills. Okay, if we have a sovereign nation state and we have a municipal system, we need people who actually know how to go up there when there's a storm and put the electricity have electricity start working again. So
exactly,
yeah, having a technical education is very important. That's why I say typically you go to school, particularly higher education, to gain a technical skill so that you can have a career and make a living.
Actually, education can be theoretical, and I'm finding this out where actually I make my living from a technical skill in bookkeeping while I pursue my degree in business and then eventually law. So had I known things differently, I would have gotten technical skills, especially when people are coming from lower income families such as I did. We need to develop a skill while we pursue higher profession knowledge bases. So that
that's something that Booker T. Washington argued and articulated.
So I just think that Black people, we need two sets of education, because you can have technical skill, but if you don't have the correct socio-political orientation, you'll end up being a well-educated fool, somebody like Henry Louis Gates.
Well, I wouldn't argue that Henry Louis Gates is a well-educated fool. I would argue that he is someone who's decided to side with the oppressor, because he believes that there is a social, political, and financial benefit for doing so. I mean, I've read the man's scholarship. He is nowhere near a fool whatsoever.
I think that's foolish. So whatever we call it, it's not something that's going to advance the independence and liberation of African people.
Yeah, I mean, he's an individualist.
Mm-hmm. Yep, an integrationist, individualist. But he's very well educated, but he doesn't have the Pan-Africanist orientation. So it almost kind of nullifies itself, in that he's not going to do the kind of work necessary, and he doesn't have the kind of thinking or desires necessary to produce a sovereign, modern, independence for African people wherever we are in the world. So that's what I'm saying. I think this is what Umar Johnson is saying. Boyce Watkins, he's just looking at it strictly financially. For example, if I keep going as a bookkeeper, just as much money with an independent bookkeeping business. I can do consulting. I can get to 6 figures just as I could with an attorney. I wouldn't be able to practice in court unless I got a particular kind of certification that you can get without having to go to law school, where you can practice in.
Yeah, you got to pass the bar.
And tax court. Let me just say this briefly. Something that I learned while getting technical skills is that the framers of the United States, they came up with certain certifications so that the common man could stand on equal footing with accountants and lawyers. And I'm thinking of a couple of certifications, specifically the enrolled agent certification that allows you to represent people before the IRS. You don't have to have a college degree. You just have to have good character and show you have to pass a rigorous exam, which shows that you have mastery of the knowledge necessary, you know how taxes and taxation works, et cetera, but you don't have to have a college degree. And they came up with that particular job specifically so the common man with no college education could stand on equal footing in court with lawyers and accountants. And there are few designations and certifications like that throughout the labor system, systems of labor and jobs, where they knew that people wouldn't have a college education, but they could still make a contribution, showing that they had the knowledge and good character. You have to pass a background check. So I'm just saying that there are more ways to be smart and be considered smart than actually having a PhD or college education, or having been codified by and certified by a mainstream institution. And those people have a lot of contributions to make. Street smarts, street scholars. In fact, our revolution now, it's gonna come more from the streets than the suites. Because I would argue, in my experience, that the academy is very sick, literally sick, especially on the issue of gender. People are, I call them psychologically dizzy. dizzy and confused.
Okay.
It's
All
not.
right. All right. So, once again, you're starting a monologue.
Okay,
So
all right. I'm sorry.
we're going to pass it to LMA.
Yeah. Okay.
And just to kind of get back to the point of education, and I believe it was Amos Wilson that said the point of education is not for you to get a job, but is to solve the problems of your community.
Yeah,
and
he
I
said
think
the
that's
goal
the
of
way,
education is to secure the survival of its people.
right? Secure the survival. But I think in that there was a lecture he was giving. I think he did say it is to solve, and I'm paraphrasing, so don't let me say I'm quoting him. I'm paraphrasing him, but it was saying it is to solve the problems of your community, and I think that's the way we definitely need to
Well,
look at it. And
actually, I can read it right here. This is from his book, Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children. He states, I think it is vital, and this is on page 1, right? Page 1. And this is introductory lecture. It says, I think it is vital that we understand that the major function of education is to help secure the survival of a people.
Right.
Page 1 of the book.
Yeah. And I think that's the way we need to approach it. So we kind of get away from this, oh, this is the white man's education, yada, yada, yada. Like, no, there's skills that we need to develop. And wherever we get those skills from, then that's just where we got to get it from. Don't look at it as the white man's science. No, it's just science. There is no white man's math. There is no white man's science. There is no white man's physics. It's just physics. It doesn't, the same physics has been been in existence since the beginning of time. It's just, some people call it this, some people call it that. You just need, we need to get the information so we can apply that towards our ends. And like I said, I do think that there's a point in which there's only so far you can go. I think just being a street intellectual, that you just have to be in the academy. Sometimes you're gonna have to hold your nose, but you're gonna have to be in that environment to really go far. I mean, I did electrical engineering, and yeah, there's some stuff you can get on Google, but there's nothing that beats being in class, being surrounded by other students, trying to learn this information. So, like I said, I would never poo-poo college. And I think we're also conflating, when we talk about like the debt problem, that's a problem with the economy, not necessarily a problem with getting an education. Like I said, if the economy was better and there was actually jobs for these people, no one would actually say, oh, you're wasting your time. No, it's just a function of the economy. If the economy's messed up, then everything's going to be messed up. So I wouldn't, like I said, I would be wary of people trying to, discourage education. Now, like I say, there's certain degrees that pay more than others. There's certain degrees that may be more useful to your survival than others, but you should always seek education from a formalized institution. Like I said, but I think the point is to go in there with an African-centered mind, a pro-Black mind, and like I said, just hold your nose. Fight back when you need to, but if it's to get the education, learn this skill, and then keep it moving. Because I think it. Go ahead.
Exactly.
I think you agree, but I do want to push back something Sister Michelle, pro-woman, said. You talked about street scholars like Steve Coakley. I take, I have a very strong critique of Steve Coakley, particularly one of the issues we talk about scholarship. He never actually engaged in or produced an independent study. So that was one issue. And he made claims that were not only slanderous, but he was unable to substantiate. One of the claims he made was that A. Philip Randolph, who we all know was an integrationist, was a closet homosexual. But there's no evidence to substantiate that claim. So these are the reasons why I tend to steer clear of individuals that engage in that type of scholarship. Matter of fact, one of my mentors was Barbara Crow, who was a mentee of Dr. John Henry Clark. Actually was able to really school me and put me on game about these many limitations of Steve Coakley's so-called scholarship.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so with Steve Coakley, are there things that he may have said that couldn't be substantiated about A. Philip Randolph being homosexual? I think that might have been from the fact that as he began to study the readings and the writings and the activities of the wealthy and the powerful, he found homosexuality to be rampant. So in terms of that specific claim about A. Philip Randolph being a homosexual, that may have been something that he said that was unsubstantiated. However, overall, generally, his critique of the power structure and their maneuvering.
But we're not talking about. We're talking about A. Philip Randolph.
But I'm speaking to the credibility of his other scholarship that absolutely was credible, that absolutely could be substantiated, that nobody would debate him on. So that's what I'm speaking to. Now, the A. Philip Randolph thing, okay, maybe he misspoke on that. I have to go back and get back into his writings and to see about why he would feel that way.
Well, I mean, a lot of it was because he was an assimilationist. That was the basis for why he made those slanderous claims against A. Philip Randolph. I'm not an assimilationist, but I do respect the work that A. Philip Randolph did, particularly them taking 13 some years, 11, 12, 13 some years to actually create the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and Maids. So they had an actual collective bargaining unit to advocate for Black people receiving higher wages, so Black people could just be fired for no reason at all, and protect them at least at some level from structural racism in the labor in labor. Right, the fact that numerous members of the organization were actually killed and physically assaulted by the power elite based on due to them seeking to organize and create a Black union. Like, so I said, like I said, this is what happens when the people are street scholars, right? And so now you're attacking someone based on their ideology rather than the work that they actually did.
For instance, Steve has done analysis and breakdowns on many different topics. In fact, I would argue that his research on the Divine Nine and the Boule is the reason why Black people today are questioning the Boule and the elite and those kinds of organizations, especially in their relationship to Black nationalism, which they tend to fight against. So Steve has absolutely credible analysis on other topics. Was he wrong about the A. Philip Randolph thing, about him being homosexual? Possibly, but that doesn't discredit any of his number actually groundbreaking, profound analysis.
Well, it wasn't groundbreaking because he wasn't the first person to actually provide those critiques.
No, actually he was, and some of the things
he wasn't.
He kind of broke ground on urban research, where you had actual everyday Black folks reading things like the Council on Foreign Relations, reading the position papers of.
Wait. First off, as I said before, Steve Kirkley never engaged in an independent study, ever. That's a fact.
But that
research is when you actually do an independent study. I've done an independent study. It's called a dissertation.
And I'm happy for you, Bakari. That's gonna get you in trouble with Black people, Bakari.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
I'm telling you.
I've been here for 40 years.
I'm a scholar, and I know better than you. When you are putting your scholarship and your credentials in service of Black people, that's going to be helpful. But when you are pulling your credentials to say that you're better than us, and
I never said anything about better.
Get you in trouble with Black people.
I did not say anything about better. You are making that argument. I've never said that.
You just said it. When you're telling me that he never.
That's not something that he actually did. I'm making a historical fact. Why is that? That's not something that's problematic. He never engaged in independent research.
Does not take away from the accurate analysis that he gave us of the extent to which the enemy would go to level the oppression that they do in our communities. He got Black people to thinking differently about what they're doing, where to go and find their tools, their strategies and tactics, so that we can know what's coming up and how to defend and prepare ourselves for what they're throwing against us. He absolutely broke ground in that respect. He had Black people reading position papers. Malcolm X said, if you want to hide something from Black people, put it in a book. Well, put it in a position paper. That's a better hiding place. So Steve Coakley had people reading position papers of organizations like the Heritage Foundation. That now we understand that Project 2025 comes out of that. So Steve actually did break ground in that way, because Black people weren't doing that to scale until he came along and started doing that sort of thing. I had some falling out with him. I'm his first producer, by the way. I was the first person to put him and therefore that kind of information on cable access television. Until then, I hadn't seen that kind of information really in television.
I mean, that may be something that was new to you, but I know people right here in Dayton, Ohio, that was doing that type of thing long before I was even a thought in my mother's womb.
Well, maybe they didn't gain the reach and the impact. And
the organization was called Al-Kabi. They've been around since the late 1960s.
I hadn't heard of them.
And like I said, one of the individuals I named, my mentor, Baba Kwaku Larry Crow, was mentored by not only John G. Jackson, but also Dr. John Henry Clark as well.
So I hadn't heard of them. So are they?
And Baba Crow worked with the Institute of Positive Education in Chicago. He worked with Dr. Jacob Carruthers, and he was a contemporary and a co-worker and worked with Dr. Hakeem Matabuti at Third World Press.
And I've heard of Hakeem Matabuti and the Institute of Positive Education and all those things. I hadn't heard of this particular brother that you're speaking of.
Matter of fact, I could go so far to where Baba Crow was the Midwest president of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization. So much so that when I was meeting with one of my thesis committee members, when I was working on my master's degree in African Studies, I mentioned Kwaku Larry Crow, and Dr. Akil Houston knew who he was. I'm like, how do you know? So once again, we're gonna move forward. Final thoughts from the panel before we close out. Go ahead, sister.
Okay, so I'll go first. I'll be brief. I just came up to talk about the coat of arms. I hope that line of thinking leads to bigger and better things. As I said, I do a lot of what I do to get us to better thinking and therefore better outcomes. When we got off the ship, we didn't know we'd come up with the Underground Railroad, but we woke up every morning with our mind set on freedom, like that song says. Then we came up with the Underground Railroad and all of its intricacies. And so I'm hoping that removal from the coat of arms will be the continuation of a line of thinking that Black people are on to lead us to sovereignty and independence. And yeah, we can agree to disagree on some things, Bakari, but I think if you pull that scholarship and use that to try to be elitist and say that your opinion and outlook is more valid or better than someone like myself who doesn't have a college degree yet, that's going to get you in trouble with Black people.
Hold on. First off, you said you're in law school, correct?
No. I probably do have a college degree, but a lot of my credits didn't transfer. So actually, I'm at Harold Washington College in Chicago. So I'm at a junior college, about to finish up. Then I'm going to get my 4-year degree, and then I'm going to go to law school. But
okay, shout out to the Shy.
Education that is more impactful on my thinking, so that now I will use my technical training in service of my people. If I did not have that other education from people like Steve Coakley, I'd be a well-educated fool.
Very good. LMA.
Similar. Like I said, I'm happy that for the steps that Trinidad and Tobago's taking. I would like for them and many other countries and many other peoples to take the same steps. This is kind of to what the sister's saying, like what like the technical knowledge. I think of it as like it's like an arrow. The technical knowledge is how far the bow is pulled and how hard it's shot, how fast it's shot. And then your education in terms of Pan-Africanism and, just your own history and where your people should go, that's the direction. So you can be like an arrow, you can be shot very far, but you can also be shot in the wrong direction. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Brother Dwayne and Brother Jabril.
To be honest, I think I did a lot of most of the speaking early on in the program, so I don't know if I have too much to add on the particular topic of Trinidad and what we spoke about. But I think I left for a bit of it too, so I don't know how much continued when I was gone. But I think the whole conversation about education and qualifications, I think that could be a separate show, because I think that's actually a very important conversation to be had in the community in terms of on the one hand, we do have an issue with certain institutions of higher learning actually being institutions that promote very racist ideas, institutions that promote very harmful ideas for African people. But I think on the other extreme of that, we do have people who present themselves to be intellectuals who have no qualifications, really have no business purporting themselves to be what they claim to be, and it does create a lot of confusion in the community as well. So we definitely need to have a conversation on, I think, more so credibility. When somebody's presenting themselves as an intellectual or a scholar and presenting information to the community, how do we assess their credibility? And it's not to say that somebody who doesn't have a college education can't be credible, but it's just a matter of what is the standard that we should use as a community to assess whether or not information is credible, whether or not information is accurate. But yeah, like I said, that might be a separate.
And if I could, one of the primary things that you would do when you look at a study is you're going to assess the person's methodology.
Yeah, correct.
That's what you do. Like, I was having a conversation with someone at the gym, and we were talking about there was a book on the book on King Leopold called King Leopold's Ghost. So the brother was like, "Well, I'm not even going to read the book." I'm like, "Well, why not?" He said, "Because it's not factual." I said, "Well, how would you know that unless you read it?" Right? And I said, in order to question the efficacy of the book and the veracity of what's being written, you need to actually read it, right? And then I said, if we can have a question about the methodological approach to use to gain the data you use to write, that the person used to write the book. So typically, in terms of scholarship, you would look at the methodological approach that the person used to glean the information for their study. That's typically what you do. So, for example, if I said I was going to do a case study on a Black Culture Center, which a case study would be my methodological approach, but I use a quantitative data analysis, you say, hold on, those two don't compute, because a case study methodology, you're supposed to use qualitative research methods, not quantitative, right? So if you knew that, you'd be like, nah, this doesn't add up at all. This guy's running game. Right, but if you don't know that, I could present this to the community and everything like, man, this guy is brilliant. Brother Jabril.
Yeah, so what I would say is, African people, we have no friends, as the great Nana John Henry Clark said. If you want a friend, look in the mirror. What is he talking about? He's not talking about just yourself, he's talking about your people, African people. Right? First law of nature, Brother Dwayne has heard me say this a billion times, a trillion times at this point. First law of nature is self-preservation. Don't look to any other people to help you out of the shit that we're in right now. No, it benefits nobody if African people gain sovereignty. I say all this to say, if you're just talking about how we can get out of this, or you're just talking for the sake of talking, even worse, you're doing your people a disservice. You work to bring about that kind of work where we're actually have sovereignty, right? But we're not oppressed. So what I would say, the way you go about doing that is join an organization. That's the only way. If you're not doing that, you're a waste of time. Last thing I'll say here is we brought up, he was posting quite a few times, so I'm going to read a small section in this book that Lumumba and I love so much, my favorite book actually. And this is for all my African family in the world. I love the challenge of being African in today's world. It's wonderful. I love digging in my heels against the impossible odds of being Black in America. What greater challenge could we have in life today than to be African? What greater testament to our heroism to overcome the problems that face us today? What greater opportunity can we have to transform ourselves and transform the world in the process? Why would we wish to escape this kind of challenge? It's too wonderful, too magnificent. We should eat this kind of challenge for breakfast. Much love, African family.
Appreciation. Until next time, y'all know what to do. Always bet on Black. Peace.